welcome everyone, and I'm actually going to turn this over to Rob, but here we are. Rob and I convened yesterday, and we are trying a few new things, and I'll let him explain what they are, and or at least the one, he had an idea, and I think it's good. And so I'll turn it over to you, Rob, okay?
Thank you very much. I thought this would be cooler than it is, because Melissa's done way more preparation than me in terms of what she just mentioned, being as she's got a book cam now. But yeah, I'm basically a fanboy of Nick Hayes, so schöne Grüße, Nick.
Well, I'm a fangirl, and that's why I've got the book cam, because I said out loud publicly, I'm so jealous of Nick Hayes at Hayes Reviews and his book cam, and someone sent me one last week. I unboxed it yesterday, and then I put Rob through the tedium of me figuring out how to use it.
It was not tedious. It was good. It was really good.
Well, Rob's idea was to take another one from the Nick Hayes Reviews page and to start this with basically what Nick does with his book readings, which is to have a preamble where he might get a little deeper into some of the characters involved. So this is all Rob's idea, and I thought it was very good that we preamble our sections with some information that you don't find in the book, and then we bullet point the chapter. So I thought that was a great idea, and that's how we proceeded. And so now back to you, Rob.
Indeed. Stealing Nick's idea, preamble, ramble a bit. Basically because... and also credit where it's due. Frank also pointed out how kind of condescending that Quigley can be whilst writing, and he expects you to know stuff that you might not have read before, or he just he sets his level as you are a university graduate and you know everything I'm saying, and other people are all stupid, which I will continue to prove when I start the first opening bit of this chapter. But yeah, he basically goes forward with, think about this, writing in 1963 was what it was. The difference between an A bomb and an H bomb isn't explained, so I thought I'd do a quick Google search because I wasn't really sure myself, even though I'm not that stupid. An A bomb is the fission bomb, which means splitting the atom, and that was the original type that was like Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Yeah, splitting the atom is the technique, and the H bomb is the fusion type, which takes multiple nuclei, and they basically hit together to cause the explosion. And if anyone knows better, please correct me, because then I will not be as ignorant as I was before I started.
Fission and fusion is two different things. Splitting it and adding together. So the fusion is adding together, the fission is separating. So
yeah,
that's where it comes from.
That's, I hope, well, I've maybe been too quick, but yes, indeed. Fission is the splitting of the atom, and fusion is two multiple atoms hitting each other to cause the explosion in each case. But like I said, Quigley just says, this is one and this is the other, and carries on as if everyone knows what he's talking about. Also, quite heavily in the beginning of this chapter, he mentions Oppenheimer, and I thought I'd do some research because that's a name that's definitely German founding, and he was indeed second generation. So his father came from Hessen in Germany, and moved to New York and was quite successful as a businessman, as you are. And I don't even need to say which religion he belonged to if he emigrated from Germany in the end of the...
Rob?
Am I talking too quick?
No, you're not talking too quick. I totally forgot when we set this up that we were going to do the screen share so that we could record some of those images that we're talking about.
I will. Wait a minute. I'll open up my file.
We did practice this yesterday.
Yeah, I did indeed. Very true.
But I'm forgetful too. I'm sitting here all of a sudden going, well, I'm not seeing what he's talking about.
Can you see my screen?
I can. Does everybody else?
Yeah.
Yeah, screen's coming through good here.
Okay. It should.
Hey, we did it. This is exciting. We're progressing.
I hope that I can also scroll somehow. Wait a minute. I need to now find out. If I scroll, does it scroll with it? Or is it just?
It does. I'm seeing the scroll.
Great.
The scrolling
Fantastic.
is happening.
Right. Here we go. Mr. Oppenheimer, as it says, theoretical physicist, and of course Manhattan Project and Los Alamos labs. It's somewhere later it says that he wasn't the kind of guy to actually sit and do the experiments. He was more of the leader and the motivational type. But what was interesting to me, obviously Oppenheimer is a German surname. So I went into his childhood. Where is it? There we go. That he's a non-observant Jewish family. And his father basically made good money by moving to New York. Interesting is when you get to the Ethical Culture Society School, and that kind of already gives it away, doesn't it? If you go ethical culture, it's going to be about some kind of interesting social, economical views and from a certain class of people. And I also went to Felix Adler, who's also from Hessen in Germany. And the first word that hit my eye is euthanasia. Isn't that wonderful? That these types even start schools. So, yeah, that's where Oppenheimer got his first education. And he went to Harvard, became Phi Beta Kappa member, which is, in fact, I wrote it down somewhere, 17 presidents, 42 Supreme Court justices, and 136 Nobel laureates. So he's already, with his education, in a certain class of people that also think about certain things, i.e. euthanasia again. He then moved on to Christ College in Cambridge, but he didn't like it there. That was down here. And then he went to Göttingen in Germany, which was an interesting choice, being as they were already well on the way to Nazi Germany. We know that. We've learned about that in previous chapters. But he met Werner Heisenberg, who was also a German theoretical physicist, and also during World War II for the Nazi Party, working on nuclear weapons. Can be seen here. So it's kind of he was already going on. So I don't know. The question was raised at some point whether nukes are real or not. I don't know, but it was clearly going on that somebody did research into that direction.
Yeah, I'll just interject. I was filling Rob's head with this theory because I am doing a real history in January, I think, or February, with a longtime listener to Ellen, and he is a proponent. He's really into the nuclear weapons hoax theory. And I said, well, I just don't find that interesting, but I'm willing to talk about anything. I don't find it that interesting because I think we're, way down the road with other things that are, right in front of us and very harmful. But then I realized that another listener is working on a project that also features the same idea. So it's definitely out there. I don't know what to think about this. I mean, it's nuclear weapons and nuclear energy are two different things. I happen to be acquainted and in conversation years ago with a woman who was Russian and had basically dedicated her life to showing what had happened at Chernobyl, documenting it. She hazmated up, took her motorcycle all through that region, took samples out, had them independently analyzed and so forth. And one of these people that I was talking with said, no, that area is alive and thriving. And just based on that, I've talked to several different people who say that they are, they're Russia, they live in Russia, they're Russian, they live in Russia, or they know Russians, et cetera, or they've been to the region, and yes, it's pretty desolate and destroyed. So this is definitely a conspiracy that is out there, but we in this book club, are working from the point of view that they are real, these weapons are real. That doesn't mean that the iconic photographs around Hiroshima were not doctored or, in fact, completely made up for the purposes of making it look more dramatic, etc. But Alan, he never entertained the idea that this weaponry or potential source of energy was not real. So that's, there you go.
That doesn't mean that it is real just because Alan didn't understand or whatever. I think the evidence, you've got to look at the evidence on the ground. Is there radioactivity? And there seems to be a lack of evidence there's radioactivity after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. A lot of people died. There's lots of napalm and lots of all that sort of stuff. So.
Well, I mean, this is all interesting. Like I say, it's not something that I get too caught up in, because one of the ideas behind the whole theory that this didn't happen and these weapons aren't real is that this was a huge psyop to create fear.
No, I'm not saying it didn't happen. People die. People, have horrific deaths. And as soon as you say, it didn't happen, then that's incorrect. Saying it's a psyop. No, it's not. People died. You've got photos and you've got videos of people dying, skin falling off them. It doesn't mean it's...
Yeah, no, I mean, what I'm saying, though, Greg, is not that nothing happened. What I'm saying is that whether or not nuclear weaponry is a thing that exists, the people at the top who are organized, that they would do something that would cause this kind of damage in people. Now, some people on the extreme of this, Greg, don't think that anything happened, that there wasn't flesh falling off of people. There is that on the spectrum of the theory. But a lot of people, like you yourself, are saying something happened, skin fell off, it was horrific. To my mind, people who would organize, if, one idea is that this was just dynamite, huge quantities of dynamite that was used. Well, the people who would do something like that are people who are monsters. So it doesn't really matter whether they're using nuclear weaponry or dynamite or some other weaponry that'll make your skin fall off. We're talking about monsters. So the idea is that if we accept that this was a hoax, then we basically free ourselves from being in fear to what these people can do, that part of it was a psyop to make something look like it was much worse or potentially much more far spreading in the damage that it could do was a psyop. Not that it didn't happen, but the psyop was to create fear. And, but to me, I don't know, Greg, to me, this is I don't see the value of going down this rabbit hole. Do you? I mean, if you do, I'd love to know about that, because this is something that I've been thinking about.
Rabbit hole? What rabbit hole are you talking about?
that it's either that nothing happened or that the A-bomb that we were told that they used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki did not happen, was not real. Either one of those rabbit holes. Two sub-rabbit holes.
That's two false dichotomies. You're saying that, there's monsters that, that you're going from one extreme to the other. You're going that nothing happened, or there's monsters that can create this this energy that nobody can control. We all know that there's monsters. We all know there's people that can do harm. Why isn't there a balance between there's people that will do harm without technology that we do not understand and can control? This is you literally are producing the extreme dichotomy here, Melissa, of nothing or everything.
Well, I don't mean to be doing that, Greg. I'm genuinely curious about this because I know where Alan was coming from on this. And I also know that Alan strongly had reason to believe this or know this, that there are levels of science and that there are very high levels of science, which we haven't a clue about. So I'm not trying to make a dichotomy. I'm not trying to make this opaque for people. I am curious about it. But to me, either extreme of that venue of questioning it, I don't understand the point of it. If you do, I'd love to hear what you think.
Well, my thought is that there are people, there are monsters that will do whatever they need to do, and they will produce whatever story they need to produce, so you're in fear always. They will. You get from one extreme that you get such benevolent people, and then you get to the other extreme that there's monsters that will create these nuclear weapons that will destroy reality. We go from one extreme to the other. So we do, there's a balance in everything. These people have made huge, massive bombs, and they drop them on innocent people. And it doesn't matter if they're nuclear, napalm, or whatever, skin falling off. And maybe, that's obviously a good psychological view that we can look at, skin falling off people. It doesn't matter. People die. There's kids getting killed for nothing. This is what we're talking about at the minute, isn't it? Why are we killing children in other countries because they've got other views of how we should live in the world? So that's what I think. It's not. It's extremism. We are trying to define the boundaries of our own extremism, and we need to find balance, I think.
Well, we need to find balance if balance is the goal, if that's what we think the goal is. If these people are extreme, meaning if Alan was right that there are levels of science way beyond what we can fathom, way beyond even the horrors that can be conjured up to control us with fear, then maybe balance isn't the goal. Maybe to see head on just how evil and diabolical and capable of ultimate destruction is out there. I don't know. I'm not the last word on this. It's just a dialogue. I don't want to get too far off of it, though. I think we should give it back to Rob, but that's interesting. I am not the last word on this, though. Please.
We're all good. I will even Quigley does a short bit of a there my child, it isn't that bad, which I will come to in a few seconds. But if anyone is interested, and I'm hoping I'm not going to bore you with my own personal history, I was born in 1988. And I've been visiting Germany many times as a child, and my father was stationed in Germany as a soldier before I was born, though. But where I now live is roughly where this red dot is, in the center of Germany, and that was the Iron Curtain ran, down here and across this way. So all of this was East Germany, and this was west from top all the way down to the south, which is Bavaria, where I now live. As you can hear from my voice, though, I was born and raised in Nottinghamshire. I've got an interesting side note to my childhood, but that will come later if we do have time. But basically, this village is quite famous around here because it literally was Little Berlin. There's like 15 houses, 7 of which were on the east side and 7 of which were on the West German side. And they even had, like you can see on the picture, barbed wire behind the Berlin Wall, which we also had, and guards and dogs and bombs, and people were shot at that border as well. So like Greg said, people are dying for ideologies. And unfortunately, it hasn't changed much in the 40 years since the reunification of Germany. But there is a museum, and if you are ever in the region, come visit me and come visit this museum, because it's really interesting to see how ridiculous the whole situation during the Cold War was. Which brings me to my second point. The Cold War itself. When the hell did they come up with the term Cold War? And I found this website, which is quite interesting, called Alliiertenmuseum.de. So it's a German website, but it literally means the Allies Museum, being the opposite to the Axis powers. And they basically state that in early September 1947, they were already... Mr. Walter Lippmann was already using the term Cold War. Further down, Lippmann, however, was not the first person to use the term. Just months earlier, financial magnate Bernard Baruch, or however you pronounce his name, gave a speech in which he already talked about Russia and America, and it being, like Greg said, a way of life, being the reason to kill people or not. And it was already the midst of a Cold War. So I was like, I really came to this chapter ignorant, and I have to admit that I thought the Cold War was because it ended with nothing happening, and not that people were already talking about the Cold War within months of it actually beginning, as it were. But my own personal hero, Mr. Eric Blair, also used the term Cold War at the end. Here it is. Permanent state of Cold War, when he's talking about his 1984 three world powers scenario. So I was like, holy, you know what I mean? So when then, and we'll benchmark this at 33 minutes past, so you can do like Nick does, a little, the top caption, as it were, or the top comment, when we actually start the book. The beginning of chapter 17, quickly, like I mentioned, kind of talking down to the audience, as it were, on page 995, I think it is, because I do have to apologize if I do get the page number wrong. It's because I'm reading the New Millennium edition, and not the originals. So I might get them. I've noted some of the page numbers, and I hope I get them right throughout. But if I'm wrong, I do apologize. He basically says, the period as a whole is so complex that no successful effort has been made by any historian to present it as a unity. So that's his own ego there. And that mankind and civilized life got through the period of almost 2 decades, being 1945 to 65, that he's kind of talking about, may be attributed to a number of lucky chances. And I've underlined that and put CFR ? Because he obviously knows what's going on, because they already know it's a Cold War. So they know that nothing's going to happen. And then further down, the Cold War is almost always described in terms which put minor emphasis on which may even neglect the role of Soviet-American technological rivalry. This is done because most historians, again his own arrogance, do not feel competent to discuss it, but chiefly it is done because much of the evidence is secret, again implying he knows the answers. He has contacts on both sides, if not both sides are being controlled by the same puppeteer. So again, Greg, people are dying and they are evil. Not just Greg, I'm not picking on you, man. I'm just saying that your point is definitely valid, that people are dying because other people are willing to make weaponry that's just truly horrific. And they know it. Both sides know, because he's obviously just written it. The evidence is secret, but he knows because he's confident enough to write about it and to brag about it. Because of such secrecy, the story of the Soviet-American technological rivalry falls into two quite distinct and even contradictory parts. One, the real situation, and what the prevalent public opinion believed the situation to be. That sounds kind of 2020-ish to me, because, like, everybody knew. Everyone in our circles knew. We could point fingers and go, hey, it's a lab. Come on, there's a lab in Wuhan. Oh, no, it's a wet market. What are your thoughts? If anyone wants to jump in, feel free. Because that was totally, like, convid operation to me. That he states the so-called H-bomb, that the Soviets, 1954 to 55, had it some months before we did, meaning the American side, obviously, when public opinion believed the opposite. Again, in late 1960, there was widespread belief throughout the world in a so-called missile gap. Who knew? Who published it? Who said it is what it is? And who claimed, wait a minute, I need to stop sharing my screen so I can go across again. In dealing with the central factor of the world situation, the historian is prevented by secrecy on both sides. Again, meaning he's sworn an oath to both sides. Or is it just an oath to, I don't know, some secret organization? And unfortunately, the influence of this factor is so central and thus so pervasive that an inability to be sure of the facts on this matter brings a fair amount of uncertainty. But he knows what he's talking about because he so confidently talks about what he's talking about. So I don't believe him, to be fair. That's kind of hedging his bets for the previous two paragraphs with he knows the secrets because the evidence is secret. So he's actually, lying at that point. Either he's lying that he's just making up the fact, or he's lying in that he's just covered his own arse, as it were, by saying we can only make an estimate.
I think when people are actually writing these books and stuff, they're only using their, pre-knowledge and what they've been taught and their estimates and stuff like that. So you're right, mate. Totally.
I was kind of inferring that it was because of his CFR that he does actually know. But coming back to your point, and indeed, John just put a comment in the group. So thank you, man. You're absolutely right. And even Quigley points out that, where was I? The fear of human extermination, this bit, was spread by well-intentioned, however mistaken. So they're kind of actually making these films or novels to appeal for peace, as far as I get what he's trying to mean. But he's obviously saying they are mistaken in that using such nuclear weapons will not actually destroy humanity, will certainly not result from the weapons which would be used in total nuclear war. So mankind will survive whatever happens. I'll come to a couple of numbers later, which are quite horrific, and people will die, but definitely not that will wipe out humanity. But if you do want to check out Neville Shoots on the Beach, there's the version that he means here is 1959, I think, with Fred Astaire and some other people in it. The interesting thing to note is that the film is set in Australia, but I think there's one kind of Australian accent in the entire film, which did make me chuckle. I just thought, did they not have actors with Australian accents, or did they not even try, or was that just not done? And that Hollywood kept them all American because half of the whole submarine crew are obviously American, but all the Australians speak with an American accent, which I find quite amusing.
Rob, are you meaning to share a screen right now?
Wait a minute.
I don't see one.
Wait a minute. I have to re-click on it. Do apologise. Will you work? Oh man. I do apologise.
That is okay. I think we're just getting used to it. I think it's like you have to stop sharing and then reshare, select on the thing, and then, it's a back and forth thing.
It might be the moment you click out that it stops sharing, I think.
I mean, what does nuclear mean in the whole scientific preface? It means the center of everything. If you can explode and destroy the center of reality, I mean, come on.
Yeah, there you go. I like that.
Do apologise. I appear to, whilst trying to share my screen, the settings closed the entire Telegram app. Never mind. I'm back. I hope you didn't miss me too much. Yeah, and also John pointed out that the only way, even if some Hitler type did decide to try and destroy humanity, he would have to encase a large number of thermonuclear bombs with thick layers of cobalt, and John even pointed out in the chat correctly, cobalt 60 being horrendously radioactive. Cobalt 60 is 320 times as radioactive as radium. So yes, that would be a whole lot worse than just the nuclear missiles that are being shot. Yeah, I sincerely hope that nobody actually ever uses any, to be fair, especially as, now that you know my location, central Germany, we have pretty much on the same horizontal Ramstein US base, where famously all the drones that go over the Middle East are controlled from. So I hope that no US soldiers are going to knock on my door in the next couple of hours. But everybody knows it's there. And there's also definitely multiple nuclear rocket sites in Germany, even though the Germans, ironically, still aren't allowed to even have nuclear-powered submarines. Not even nuclear weapons. They're not even allowed to have nuclear-powered submarines in their military. But yeah, we do everything that the Americans tell us to do anyway. And on that point, greetings to my friends in the Bundeswehr. Yeah, they'll probably give me a slap for mentioning that one. Yes, however, a cobalt bomb, nobody's going to be that stupid. And normal war would kill hundreds of millions. And we would actually create monsters, he says. But let's hope it doesn't get that far. Continuing. Where was I? Yeah, it's also on the same page. Or on the...
GHQ. Have they still got GHQ in Germany, the joint headquarters?
I think it is. Yeah, they at least had a meeting here recently. But now that Mark Rutte is a Dutch, the Dutch head of political side of NATO, I'm not actually up to speed. But yeah,
So
a lot of stuff.
If you're British, if you're British and you work for the British military, how are you actually based in Germany? Because
I don't. I'm not military at all.
Okay. I lived in Bruggen and by JHQ, and we were. This is in 1991 when the IRA were meant to have killed the two Australian guys in Romont, which was 2 miles from my base. So when I was 9 years old, I had to search under my car every day for bombs and stuff like that. So I'm quite educated in sort of all this sort of stuff. So.
Oh man, that's well interesting. So you were stationed here as a child with your parents. I get it. I take.
Yeah, we were RAF in RAF Bruggen, which is in the north of Germany on the Dutch border.
Yeah, cool stuff. Now I'm 100% civilian, and I am the first traitor, as it were, not to join the army in 3 generations. This is quite an important point. The chief subdivisions of the history of nuclear balance. And then he goes on from the American atomic monopoly from June 1945. And I was thinking, okay, so they literally... he's calling it from the beginning of from the end of the World War II with the Hiroshima bomb that they had the supremacy. And then I looked into, but it might close my window. So you're going to have to believe me on this fact. Also relating to Oppenheimer, that FDR actually began the program to develop the atomic bomb 2 months before the US military entered World War II. And then by date exact is the October the 9th, 1941, the US also wanted to start developing an atomic bomb. And as we know from Oppenheimer's studies in Göttingen, where he met Werner Heisenberg, who was the leading nuclear researcher in the Nazi Germany. He also met Enrico Fermi, who was an Italian, and he was also involved in the Manhattan Project. So just a side note, that they were working on this before they even thought about when they're going to use it. It was well underway, as it were. But then you kind of question yourself and go, so why did it take them till 1957, or why did they keep testing until 1957, as it were? Also quite funny that he only references Joe 1 as the first Soviet atom bomb. And I thought, the Soviets wouldn't call their bomb Joe, not by any stretch of imagination. That was actually the US code name because of Joseph Stalin. The Soviets called it the RDS-1. So full disclosure on that one. I did my research. I hope I keep it up through the rest of the chapter. The brief nuclear balance after Joe 1 or the RDS-1 was developed by the Soviets. And then again, I kind of thought Anthony C. Sutton's Soviets and Wall Street, I believe it is, where he mentions that the GIs were shocked because some of the Soviet trucks resembled Ford Motor Company's trucks, and they were like, yeah, we've been sponsoring them for ages. And it does come up later on, but I'm not going to go into how many millions of dollars were sent in aid to the Soviet Union. But that was one kind of, again, like he's speaking from I know the secrets and I'm confident to write them down. So he obviously knows something about how it came to balance. Possibly that they just went, we need this war to keep up the effort, and we'll get onto that later with the beginning of the military-industrial complex, as I see it, at least from reading this chapter, that they kind of went, hey, here's some tech, catch up so that we can keep this non-war or Cold War going and keep raking in the millions over the next 20 or something years. And as long as you don't use them, we won't, kind of thing. But that's me hypothesizing. The race for the hydrogen bomb, as we pointed out, which is fusion technology, so two atoms or more hitting each other to create the energy to explode. I believe it's pronounced Eniwetok, which is quite an interesting island that isn't there anymore. And also, it also was very relevant to the Pacific missions in World War II. The Japanese used the island, or the atoll, where Eniwetok is, as a military base and had a runway there. And it was quite a successful operation for the US during World War II. The race for the intercontinental ballistic missile. And this, as I was reading this in preparation for this chapter a couple of weeks back, was when the whole Russia fired intercontinental ballistic missiles. And I was like, oh, history repeating itself again, or at least rhyming, even though they weren't nuclear warheads. But it was kind of a, oh shit, man, we're doing it again. Why do people have to die? Such horrific consequences, because somebody's decided that they need to fire off something in retaliation for whatever it is. And then we all know that various politicians, English speaking and of bad hairstyle type, basically caused the continuation of this war. It could have been over, but nobody stopped it. And just the opposite. We can give you millions and millions and millions and just keep wearing your green jumper. And I'm simplifying it and I'm oversimplifying it, and I apologize. But that's the kind of thing that just springs to mind, especially in this horrible time that we're living in, even though it's quite interesting to read up on this stuff. And that's why I'm happy to donate my time and ramble on at you, whilst pointing out that we have done this as a race, as a nation, as a left, right, or east, west stereotype, as it were, if you get what I mean. And it doesn't have to be this way, and it definitely doesn't have to be this way. The US continued with their development, and the Soviets had a smaller number of rockets, but they went up to 20 megatons, so 20 million tons of TNT. But they were easy to spy out on using the American technology, whereas the Americans, they went for smaller warheads and more rounds, as it were, to fire off. The interesting bit is on the next page, where is it? It begins with even. This chapter or paragraph interested me a lot. Basically, elaborate calculations on the giant electronic computers in the Pentagon were estimating the consequences of a hypothetical total nuclear war in June 1963. Two answers were: one, if the Soviet Union struck first and the United States retaliated, the war would be over in a single day with a Russian victory. In in which they lost 40 million of their 220 million population dead and 40% of their industrial capacity annihilated, while America would have 150 million and 195 million, 150 of it, 195 million people dead and 60% of its industry destroyed. So basically declaring that the Russians are more rural and more widespread and their industry is more widespread, and because the Americans are more city and mega city orientated, that they would lose first, or they would lose more because of the population density. And then you kind of think of 2030 and what all everyone's supposed to be moving to cities and rural living is supposed to be outlawed. And then I think of this and go, I'm pretty happy to be in some little village somewhere that's unimportant, even though I am close to the former Soviet Union, as it were. If I do go back to the map, you can see also the Czech Republic is definitely not very far away. So we had the Iron Curtain on three sides, as it were. And it is referred to by the locals as the arse of the world, because we were like the last corner. You can't go much further east when the Iron Curtain was up, as it were, as to come here. Second, if the United States struck first with a nuclear attack in reply to a Soviet advance of ground troops into Germany, 75 million Russians and 110 million Americans would have been killed. So basically, the Americans knew that they couldn't win, and therefore they had to change their tactics and move to slightly less aggressive ways of thinking, because they weren't going to win if there was the total war that they wanted to keep up. The next bookmark is a few pages away. A lot of the coming pages are internal American politics, which is going to be... Melissa will be then repeating what I tell you if I read these pages to you. But basically, the internal combatants between the isolationists and the other internal, like we know, blue and red make purple, and it was purple back then as well. But they basically they're all working into their own pockets, which means I need to skip to page 1007 on this one. I don't know what the real page number is. This was kind of the beginning of the way I see it, the beginning of the military-industrial complex as we need to lie through our teeth to keep up the funding. The conclusions that the conclusions that he means here are that an intercontinental ballistic missile will therefore basically make ground troops, navy, tanks, and everything else obsolete, and so therefore the Army Air Force had the upper hand, even though they were lying, and it's never going to be just one bomb. Even though we think about it now that it's just going to be drones, there's still going to be ground troops. There's still going to be combat in the traditional sense, even though there will be drones assisting, and a lot of it will be drones or cyber attacks or anything else. But at the end of the day, if you've basically destroyed somebody's infrastructure, there'll still be somebody on the streets wanting food, wanting protection, and therefore you're going to need ground troops anyway. But $400 million worth of Boeing B-29s had already been commissioned, and $400 million in 1947 equivalent is about $7.007 billion in 2024 dollars. So you've got a kind of a benchmark, again, referencing to the current conflict and how many billions are being sent of taxpayer dollars. They're not actually going to the various countries. They're, as you know, you're all smart people, landing in companies like Boeing. They're the ones actually getting a lot of these promised billions.
The biggest commodity in war is hearts and minds, and this is, in the Iraq War, like Tony Blair, we're shooting hearts and minds. They shot pamphlets to teach people little slogans, and they've got such a technology to teach us all these heart and mind slogans now. It's incredible.
Absolutely true. Mr. Tony Blair, if you're listening, you're one of the reasons I left the UK. And also Stalinist techniques win by slogans. You're absolutely right, Greg. Absolutely right. And also shout out to Nick, and he's currently doing the Milner Fabian book, and that's pretty much laid out that Tony Blair and how he messed everything up and filled his own very, very deep pockets. And now the scumbag's part of WF. But very true, Greg. You're right.
You're doing a great job, mate. Sorry to keep on interrupting.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I want feedback. Again, this is kind of going to be covered by Melissa later, but the two groups being Air Force, Navy, or Army, which one is and basically he's admitting here that it's all about lobbyists. It's nothing to do what we actually need, nothing to do what with how this war might actually be fought. It's all about the cash again, and the power within the military or within each military group. He then goes on to move towards Mr. Oppenheimer, and one word that should stick out, or not one word, one mention that really should stick out is All Souls College, Oxford. Most of you will have read the Anglo-American book by Quigley. If you know what All Souls College is, that's basically the seed that then became the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and all the members of the Royal Institute have been, with some certainty, at least involved with people from All Souls. He then also points out, and this is relatively well documented, that Oppenheimer had communist ties. He pretty much always was a communist, and he even admitted, although he then denied it later on, that he'd been a member of pretty much every communist organization on the West Coast in the 50s, I think that was, but then he later denied having ever said that or written that down. It also, he talks about Oppenheimer as if he were a kind of a wheeler dealer, or what do I want to say, opportunistic kind of guy. That he like I said on the preamble, he wasn't the guy to sit down and actually do the testing. He was the one to present it and be the team leader and be the ego behind it. Reading the different book with a different layout, so I've got my finger on a paragraph and then I look up and can't see it on the screen. It's down here. The Spanish refugee relief. So he was on the communist side even with relation to the Spanish Civil War, which I found quite interesting. Continuing, he kind of makes assertions to political ignorance in his conclusions on where the real origins of the Cold War came, in that he basically says Stalin was ignorant and assumed that the United States would soon relapse into isolationism, as they had done in World War One, which was kind of, I can see where Quigley thinks that Stalin would think that, or if he's got any evidence for it, I don't know. But he definitely conveys also on the American side in that whole political chapter that I pretty much skipped over, or the section that I skipped over, because it would be the doubling up of Melissa's part of the chapter. The ignorance on both sides, to not want to know about the other's culture, to not try and understand about the other side, to just like we're big and powerful, and one day we'll be the biggest and the most powerful, and the others have to give in. And I'm not sure about that sentence that I've just got highlighted, whether that was really true, or whether it was his kind of poking fun and saying, look, we're the ones pulling the strings, we're the ones who know the secrets of both sides, as it were. Is this just our puppet with a mustache, or is it really, was he really pulling the strings, or did he just like to kill his own unfortunate Soviet kind of close-up friends, the ones that he made dangerous? And then I had to think back to Angela Merkel. So yeah, I probably will get some kind of knock on the door in the next couple of days. There was a politician from this region of Germany in Bavaria, and Bavaria has its own Christian Socialist Party that are just related to Merkel's Christian Democratic Party. And so if a Bavarian casts a vote for the CSU, it gets counted in with the CDU when it's a whole German vote. But we all know voting's a lie. But the CSU is a party in terms of numbers and votes, massive, but they're not big enough to be allowed to have their own chancellor. So even if the CDU win the election because of the votes that came from Bavaria, the best position that he's probably gonna, or he or she, whoever the Bavarian candidate is going to be some kind of vice chancellor or member of the inner party, as it were, but they're never going to actually take on the number one puppet role, as it were. And so she, being an evil piece of work herself, has ties to the KGB and Stasi past and things like that. So that's quite easy to find also online, her records. And admittedly, as a child growing up, you were kind of forced into being in the Freie Deutsche Jugend, and your parents definitely suffered consequences if you didn't become a member and do all the saluting and flag waving and parading and everything else that was accepted of you. But for her, she's definitely an idealist, and it's kind of weird that she then became the top candidate of the Christian Democratic Union over here. But again, we all know.
As soon as the Stasi do actually come and knock on your door, or any police force or whatever do come and knock on your door, all you have to do is ask them their name. If they can only give you a number, you have to remind them, well, are you a human being? Then don't give me a number, because you have been reduced to a number, and that is actually against, this is when we get back to like the Bible and the bloody Torah and all this rubbish that everybody chucks away. But if a human being is reduced to a 1, 2, 3, 4 number, then you're not a human being. And this is what they try to do. So you just say to them, give me your name. If you cannot give me your name and only a number, then go away. Thank you very much. So you take that strength, mate. I've encountered many of these numbers.
Thank you very much, man. I hope I don't have to use that advice, but I definitely will come in handy come the day. And being a dissident as I am, it probably will turn up at some point sooner or later. But at the moment, thankfully, our so-called Green Party are busy keeping the courts full with people who've made memes recently. I don't know whether you caught up on that, but there was a guy who, and he's an old guy. He's not even done anything wrong in his life and had a poor, I think it was his daughter with Down syndrome, and the police stormed the building because he'd made a meme of the so-called economics secretary or whatever he is. But he's basically an incompetent person, and he's ruining Germany's economic outlook. And this guy made a meme about it, and so that made the news that he was arrested for making a meme. It's ridiculous. Where is the world coming to?
Do you think that is just propaganda? Do you think that's real, or is that propaganda that makes 100,000 people shut up? This is the thing. I believe all these news stories, that we're quoting and stuff like that, they might be true. You might get a percentage of that that's true. Most of it is bullshit. Most of it is propaganda, so people shut up and don't stand up like a human being and say, my name is Greg Gilbert, I'm a Scottish citizen, I'm a Brit, you're not coming into my country, and you're not giving me your bullshit, mate. That's how they do it. It's easy done, pal. Easy done. That's my 2 cents.
I personally, I believe that one was real. It wasn't a hard to do thing. He just took the logo of a shampoo company called Schwarzkopf, black head or black hair, because they referred to me as a redhead, as a Rotkopf. He just took that and changed the word to Schwachkopf, which just means idiot, and that was quite funny to see. And I think the guy, he seemed intelligent enough to operate a computer, but not in. I don't think that one was really faked. But yes, I agree. There's lots and lots, even here. And it's kind of ironic that the AFD have been mentioned on the channel before. They're just puppets. They're controlled opposition. But the others have all had people going on the street saying, we need to defend democracy by banning this party and destroying when they're on the campaign trail, we need to go and put speakers up and throw, use water cannons and stuff to disperse the people. And I'm like, how is that democracy? The other parties need to start, even though we know they're not real, but they need to start doing a good job. And then maybe right-wing extremist parties wouldn't even catch any wind.
To the crux of the problem here. You've just got to the crux of the problem. You've identified one specific incident that's happened in 100,000, 100 million, and then what they do is propagandize that, and they put all these people on the streets that are government agents, and they make this big thing that you're now saying, oh, we need to do. This is how they do it. They use one isolated MK ultra'd person that's been so isolated from society and has to act out in such a way, and then they produce 100 characters around this to amplify it. This is how military works.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And again, like you were saying, going stealthily. This is also related to that exact point. How far do I have to go down? I need to go down to the economic unit. Basically, this was the beginning of what the Germans called the Rosinenbombe, which is literally raisin bomber. It was Stalin's move to try and kick the Allies out of Berlin and take control of the whole city. And pretending, I love it when he puts that communists are the sheep in wolves' clothing. They pretended to cooperate with any anti-fascist groups. I kind of, I don't know. Maybe I've been conditioned to just go, that's just Fabian society again. The unwillingness, these are the Soviet-controlled inner German government, that they refused to cooperate with any of the Western powers and gradually closed off their occupation zone. And it really was, even that village that I showed you earlier, there were two boys. They basically stood at the border and mooned. And two East German guards broke with their command, jumped out through a gate in the wall, a little door, and grabbed these two young lads and pulled them onto the east side. And they had to be that was one of those spy swaps. These two lads had to be given back. I remember when I visited that museum that they told us this story. I was like, how ridiculous is that they can even do kidnapping? But yeah, they meant the usual exchange, and this means the whole of Germany, the economic exchange within Germany, food from the agricultural east and industrial products from the west had been broken. And then this kind of rang a bell with Ukraine. The East German food had been drained to the Soviet Union, and to prevent starvation of the West Germans, the United States and Britain had to send hundreds of millions of dollars worth of food and other supplies. On May 3rd, General Lucius D. Clay, head of the American military government in Germany, informed the Russians that no future agreements would be made to ship West German industrial equipment. Again, Anthony C. Sutton and how the West helped the Soviets. And no industrial equipment as reparations to Russia until the Russians agreed to treat Germany as an economic unit, which we all know didn't happen. And to give some accounting for their reparations plundering of East Germany. Both points referred to open violations of the Potsdam Agreement regarding the treatment of Germany. The Soviets justified these and other violations of early agreements and the urgent need for their own economic rehabilitation. So, if there really was this need, how bad was it? And we know that they were chucking hundreds of billions of dollars over the wall, as it were. So was that money then going to the party heads? I think so. But again, I'm just reading between the lines with my own bias. But basically, hats off to all the guys who flew, or girls, who flew over the wall to East Germany or to West Berlin, flying through East German zones. I even know from my in-laws that when they took road trips and even driving on some of the Autobahn, you can still feel when you get into East Germany, because it's still the Adolf concrete roads, so it goes ka-clunk, 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 ka-clunk like a train. But that's just because you pass from one bit of concrete to the next. They're not tarmacked off yet. Even here, even now, like how many? Wait a minute. It must be nearly 100 years since the poor people who were forced to build the original Autobahn. 100 years on, and they're still in use to this day. Even though there aren't many left, but you can still find them, especially in the old East. This was quite an interesting little section. Stalin was worried. I don't believe that for a second. He might have been concerned, but I look into the videos of the guy now. He's a soulless person. He can't worry. But the weakness and depth of the Soviet system, and from ideological dissent. And then I thought of the famous quote of, "I'm not afraid of weapons or anything. I'm afraid of a man with an idea." Absolutely true. Again, that's what they're afraid of, is a guy with an idea. So my appeal, I'm trying to be one in my own little way around here. But everyone on this planet needs to find it in their own heart to become not necessarily an ideological person in terms of that you believe the next thing, but we definitely need to question more. So I need to skip ahead again. I could go into Tito, but that's also a nasty part of history. And so I need to find the right bit again. It's also well documented, and again, it's just numbers of aid, how many people, where did it come from, where did it go. I assume that you've read the chapter yourselves, and I don't want to bore you with facts because I'm going on quite respectably. I just need to not miss it whilst I'm skipping through. I do apologise if this is making anyone dizzy. If anyone wants to add anything or criticise, let me know.
The point about one man having one idea is their downfall. The problem is now there's like hundreds of thousands of people that have got the idea. So we're just running this. The play is already played out, and all we have to do is step up and play it out. You get me?
You're absolutely right. We that was my appeal. That's why I said it so blatantly and bluntly. Is that just like you said, if you know you're right and you can say, give me a name, not a number. Everybody needs to start saying no. I like the idea of, I don't know whether it was even true. It might have also been a complete lie. It was on some podcast somewhere that basically I think it was the Amish during lockdown when they said you need to use a card, which was the funniest, and put on a mask. And so they just all left their completely full shopping carts or trolleys at the checkout and said, well, I'm not going to pay then, goodbye. And that kind of made that the supermarket in their community had to lift all the bans on all of the mask mandates within like 2 weeks because everybody did it. And I just thought that's so cool. If I can move that many people to just go down to my local supermarket and just leave the food at the checkout in the trolleys. It's not good for like the food, obviously, because it has to be thrown away, at least according to German rules. But then I suppose you could go around the back and pull them out of the dustbins that we were going to pay for. But I just thought that was so cool that the power of the people has to be made aware of again. We can't sit and live in fear. Having said that, this was quite an interesting little paragraph. Basically, to summarize what happened up until this, the relationship between Soviets and Tito was more or less successful. There were things that he gained and he lost. The Czech Republic, however, they went much more willingly, as it were, or at least the politicians controlling the Czech Republic. He got the Czechoslovakia completely into the communist camp. Numerous efforts to increase his power in the last 6 years of his life, and there was also the void of who's going to take over after Stalin. Was also an internal Soviet thing. I might come to that if we have time. But the most interesting, or again, something that made me laugh about this particular paragraph, and I hope it's in here. Yeah, it is. I'm not going to try and butcher his name. The foreign minister and son of the founder of Czechoslovakia and chief of an advocate of pro-Western policy died mysteriously by a fall from a window on May 10th, 1949 or something. I just thought, where have I heard that in the last couple of months, years, multiple times? If you criticize the wrong person in the wrong country, so I'm definitely gonna keep withstanding, but I'm not gonna stand anywhere near any open windows or big staircases where any Soviet affiliate countries are concerned. The situation in Czechoslovakia kind of motivated Stalin to try a bit more. And like I mentioned, this was his effort to eject the United States, France, and Britain from their sectors in West Berlin. Apparently, he believed the United States was considering a withdrawal. Apparently, again, vague. He's Carroll Quigley. He's not vague about a lot of stuff. He's like, I put the nail in, hit the nail on the head. But apparently, I wanted to know a source for that. And also whether it was true. I couldn't find any information on did the US really want to separate from West Berlin or not. I can't really believe it, but like I said, I couldn't find any information on it, so it may be relevant. American policy in Germany for almost 3 years was confusion of conflicting and ambiguous objectives. Again, I couldn't verify or deny what he really meant by that. I can only say from what I've seen and since living here that I can't really believe maybe Berlin directly, but not Germany, because even Bavarian state law hasn't changed the way it should have in 1989. And like I said, there are US bases even just down the road. And Grafenwöhr is a massive NATO US training area where they use live munition and stuff. And that's definitely, it was talked about maybe a year and a half or two ago that the Americans wanted to leave that base, and the Germans basically protested and said, we love having the GIs here. So again, I can't say whether that the whole backstory of the Germans saying they like having the GIs was the truth or not, or whether they even contemplated leaving. All I can say is that the American military is definitely on a strong foundation in Bavaria.
What happened many times is on the American bases, they have an American PX, they call it. So that American PX has got a trade deficit, so you can go and buy stuff for cheap. So local communities of the American base would probably get passes to go onto the American base and buy the really cheap stuff. So this would be why probably that they want that infrastructure to remain.
Good point. Didn't know that. Thank you very much, man. I'm trying not to skip over the bit I want to read to you again. That's a bit later on. German currency reform of 1948 is a fiscal miracle of the fiscal miracle, in fact, of the post-war world. From it came an explosion of industrial expansion and economic prosperity for West Germany. True, the Brits, according to my father, like I said, Greg, you'll either confirm or deny. He was stationed in Niedersachsen as well. Although you might have been in Westfalen, I don't know. But the Brits basically put the money into VW, and even though they're trying to kill themselves right now, being the number one car company for the last 20-something years, if not 30 or 40, definitely is Western, with Western wind under its sails, as it were, or under its wings. The tying of the West German economy to the West as a whole, an example model for other Western European countries and for Japan, who also became a massive economic powerhouse, as it were. And a wave of prosperity for Western Europe as a whole, which continued year after year and refuted completely to claims of communists and even socialists, and to a lesser extent the claims of the American businessman that they held the sole key to prosperity. So he's basically buttering up to his banker friends and not saying that it wasn't that we rid a country of tyranny or got rid of a horrible tyrant or changed the thinking of the people. No, it's the money that solves it. The reform went on into effect on June 1st, 1948, drastically reducing the volume of money. So this might be the plan for the future, ladies and gentlemen, being as we've had, what do they call it, the business types nowadays, quantitative easing the entire time. Maybe somebody will come up with the idea of we'll not want to print money anymore. And just look how ridiculous the exchange rate was in Western Germany, exchanging new Deutschmarks for the current Reichsmarks on a 1-to-1 basis for the first 60, and then a 65 to 100 basis for all over 60. Okay. How weird is that? Do you go 1,000 times with only 60 marks in your pocket? Or how does that work? I don't get it. That's completely, but I met some old lady a few years back, and she basically said, and I mean really old now, she'd gone from pre-crash marks to Reichsmarks, and then to Deutschmarks, and then to the euro. And she was like, and we were robbed every time. And so it might have been an upwind for the entire country and the prosperity of West Germany as a country. And I know it's been nice, like as a child of the 90s, getting what you want and not that much fear of terror or war, and the standards that the Germans have. The way they build houses is fantastic. All of our industry is like thousandths of a millimeter precision. So there is definite upwind, but for the single citizen of Germany at that time, it must have been horrific. And also accounts of a guy called Wirth, who owns a massive industrial supplies company. He started off with screws and nuts and bolts for like general. He went round to car dealerships and garages and things and sold them screws, and he always had to bribe the buyers with like cigars or cigarettes, even though they'd pay like an eighth of a pfennig more, but he'd bribe them that way. And they had their house taken by the US military because he was down in Baden-Württemberg, which is also a completely US zone. and had to restart the business on a horse and cart. And even that, he started off with a wheelbarrow, then to a horse and cart, and then at some point, and this guy, his son got an exemption from school to be his driver at the age of 14 or something, and he basically drove around when they could afford a car, and I thought that was really cool. But yeah, it must have been damn hard at that time getting anywhere in life, because this wave of prosperity definitely came off the backs of hardworking people, whichever country citizens they were. And like Alan also always pointed out, that how hard post-war Britain had it. My parents also, they can remember ration cards and things. So it's kind of, he's, like I said, he's buttering up to his banker friends and that when he's saying that. The Soviet Union used the monetary reform in West Germany as an excuse for its blockade, thus provoking the need for the Berliner Luftbrücke, so the flyovers and the drops from American planes. And also, shortly after the New Year, the SED, which was the only party, it's just like in the People's Republic over in the Orient, there was only the SED, and so you could only vote for candidate A, B, C, or D. They basically purged any leaders likely to show independence. Again, we know how they work. Fabian society methods. Basically, the whole chapter then, or this section of the chapter, is ended by describing how many bombers flew over East Berlin, and how the poor people of Berlin were steadfast on the brink of starvation. And even on May 5th, a Russian fighter pilot crashed into a British plane and killed all of the people on it. So they had to supply the 2 million Berliners with food and coal over the next few years. And that was basically the biggest success, and the reason that Stalin then moved over to China, because he lost this battle of sustenance for the West Berliners. The critical year in 1949, which showed so clearly that the Kremlin's influence in Europe was severely limited because they lost to the Allies keeping on flying. And like I said, hats off to all those guys. I'm skipping over it because I'm aware of time, but to have the balls literally to fly there was a plane landing every 3 minutes or something with supplies for the people, and it was multiple million tons of coal and food each day, 8,000 tons a day, and 1,389 planes to be exact. Every 62 seconds. I do apologize, I lied, it wasn't 3 minutes. The critical year of 1949, the Soviet army saw also to shift Stalin's activity to the Far East. The Americans also thought about this. At the end of the war in the Far East, it was clear to most observers that Roosevelt's pretense that nationalist China was a great power, like his equally confused pretense that France was not a significant power, was mistaken. That kind of surprised me a little bit. Again, is he really the only one making the decisions? Is he a member and thus knowing what's going on, or is he just a puppet at that point? Every time I read this kind of language that Quigley uses, I'm like, where's he coming from, or who's writing this right now? To be like, I mentioned earlier with the Green Party minister who gets pissed off and starts having people arrested for memes, to be able to say something like that and get away with it, or did quickly get away with it, we don't know. China's war efforts against Japan weakened fairly steadily from Pearl Harbor to the end. The decline resulted very largely in almost a total corruption of the regime. Is it not corrupt now? Which left the Chinese peasant in sullen discontent and roused upon disfavor among many urban groups, notably students. And then I thought again of the Soviets. One thing people should check out is Baader-Meinhof and how the students were used by the old East in Western Germany for protest and murder and things like that. There was a whole a really good film made. You should check it out. Many portions of the huge area of China were only nominally subject to Chiang Kai-shek's rule, and a very considerable extent in the western and northwestern far interior were subject to the communist regime of Mao Zedong, and we all know how that went. This particular paragraph, one thing that stuck out to me was, in the 2 years following the defeat of Japan, 1,432 million, which is quite an interesting number, equates to 20 billion in today's money. American assistance to China vanished. I thought that was quite interesting. Everybody says that the Ukraine is corrupt and the money's disappearing. And I thought, again, history is not repeating itself, but it's definitely rhyming. And the way he just says, in one way or another, again, like this guy thinks he knows everything, or at least I'm interpreting it the way he writes. He definitely has a lot of information. I found it quite interesting that he just put that in the way he did. As kind of it doesn't matter. We can put those numbers on some draft sheet somewhere in some liabilities column, and it doesn't matter. I thought, how the hell? That's $20 billion. But like I said, history is repeating itself, or at least rhyming. Quigley then basically explains it was determined to destroy the communist regime when Mao began steps to consolidate a buffer area when he and Stalin wished to establish in the northwest and the northern China. This determination became a panic to prevent the Russian forces in Manchuria from turning over that rich area to the communist units. The Soviet forces there, after looting the area under the guise of reparations from Japan, began to withdraw early in 1946. By a simple process of information, Mao was not informing Chiang of their withdrawal schedules, and they ensured that the abandoned areas should be occupied immediately by communist forces. The United States, which had been engaged in evacuating 3 million Japanese from China, moved 14 nationalist Chinese armies, most of which had been trained and equipped by the United States. Again, go back to Anthony C. Sutton for references on how much money and how much effort was put into all of that, to North China and Manchuria to block the communist takeover. After the defeat of the communist forces in the north, however, the nationalists, contrary to American advice, attempted to crush the communist forces everywhere. They did, succeeding capturing the communist capital, but as the effort continued, their own forces were dispersed and defeated. And this is also something I highlighted. General Marshall, no, it's the next General Marshall. There you go. Marshall in 1946 became convinced that the nationalist regime was hopeless and that it overcome the communists only if the United States took actual control by American personnel, fought the communists with the American troops. He was unwilling to do this because it felt like the Chinese would resent it themselves. Is that true? That's a feeling. That's speculation, is it not? I mean, I'm good at speculating myself, but to say it was about the feeling of the local Chinese that they didn't want to continue efforts, or was it really just financial, or did they just give up on it as a total? Or possibility number 64, that General Marshall was aware that China should be built up for the future, and so we're just going to leave it docile for now, and then it'll be far easier to let the Soviets move in. I don't know. I'm just putting ideas out there. But that was one of the things I did think about when I read that. To say, is it really the reason? I don't believe so. I need to go back to the communist victories. Where are they? Again, I do apologize for my skipping through. The communist victories were carried out in conclusion in 1949. Peiping was captured from the nationalists, and 3 months later, the Yangtze River was crossed. All the South fell. The nationalist government, 8 years to the day after Pearl Harbor, fled from the mainland to Taiwan, and then I thought, okay, we're going there soon, and we'll see how, because that is something currently that's not in the news, but like 12 months ago it was, or even 6 months, I can't remember now. Time's gone since, excuse my French, since the pandemic. But everything was Taiwan. Nancy Pelosi's flown to Taiwan because of this, that, and the other, and now you don't hear anything about it. What's going on? Is it good that we're not hearing anything? Is it bad that we're not hearing anything? Again, I'm speculating, but it's just, there's so many times in this chapter that I was just like, that's happened this month, that's happened last month. Again, with the intercontinental ballistic missiles, that happened the day I was reading that exact chapter, and I was just like, oh man. This interested me quite a bit. In December 1949, Mao Zedong and Stalin met in Moscow for their first and last time. And I was like, okay, so they also had the China breaking off as an independent thing from the Soviet Union. Pretty much done deal before it happened. And that's also in the Anglo-American establishment, that all the deals, and Alan would also say that quite often, that all the deals have been done before the heads go and meet. The workers underneath, they've already signed the agreements, and they've already got everything drafted, and everybody knows what's going to happen, and they basically just meet for the signing of things, and then have a party and a piss up and hookers. Again, I'm speculating, but you know what I mean. I found that kind of ridiculous, and yeah, it's chess, isn't it? Everybody's trying to play 4 moves ahead, and think about how the opponent's next move's going to go, and are they really opponents, or are they just friends and letting the blacks against the whites slaughter each other? The last bit of my part, I'm quite happy to now just sit back and have a beer and listen to Melissa finish. I was quite surprised that he used the word, where is it? Chinese forces were weeded out and transferred to North Korea in the next 5 months. I found that a bit weird, the way he's literally calling them weeds. Or does anyone else see that as just he's using it as a phrase? But he could have said transported or found, discovered, whatever, but they're weeded out. So is he therefore calling Chinese communists weeds? Again, I'm speculating, but that was one of the things. Or another possibility, because I think this chapter was definitely co-written or assisted, or he had one of his students do some research, that it may have been multiple writers. I forgot to even mention that at the beginning. That was one of my thoughts for the preamble, but now it's not anymore. Mentioning it right at the end. If you have managed to get through the chapter and get through me rambling on about it for nearly 2 hours now, thank you very much for your attention. There's a lot of numbers, a lot of megatons, a lot of references that I didn't feel worthy of your airtime, as it were. Like I said, I assume that you've read it anyway without sleeping, because this chapter was kind of a sleeping pill, even though it was heavy and interesting, but my arms definitely got tired whilst reading this damn thing. If anyone thinks I've missed anything, please pipe up, like Melissa said. Like I said, I did skip the entire inner American political bit on purpose because Melissa's about to cover that. And I hope it was informative to you. Is anyone still there, or have you already gone to sleep? It's 9 o'clock now.
I'm here. I'm here. Thank you. That was great, Rob. If anybody wants to pipe in right now about that, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I'll get started, but I'll sit here for a minute.
That was
Just a big thank you, Rob.
What did you think? I was literally pooing my pants before I started.
You did great, Rob. That was you came prepared. You did great. I was very interested, and I got some good insights that you brought to that section. All right, I am going to dive in on my section here, which is American Confusions, 1945 to 1950. And you'll see that my screen sharing thing, can you all see this?
Yep, it's coming across here.
Super. Okay, great. So I envied Nick Hayes of Hayes Reviews web scan cam thing, and now I've got one. And so that's what you're looking at. I'll go back and forth between that and what's on my computer. But in the preamble section, I wanted to highlight a few key things and names before I got into the bullet points of the section. And I thought that I would start with Hollywood films promoting communism or the left agenda. And my brother he's a list maker. He makes lists, and he's got all kinds of things that he's cross-referenced. The movies that he's seen, has he read the book that goes along with the movie? And I mean, that's just one thing on his list. So I had remembered a conversation we had a long time ago. And I said, hey, didn't you tell me that you kept a list of all of the Hollywood movies that were anti the communist agenda or exposing the communist agenda? And he laughed. He said, oh, that would be a really short list. He said, no, what I've been doing is making a list of movies that I've seen that are pushing the communist agenda in one form or another. And then he sent me this email, which hopefully you can see, and I'll just read it to you. He said, Hollywood didn't make on-the-nose pro-communist films. So, let's see if I can work with my tech here. I can't. I'm going to try to raise it up so that you can see the whole thing. Look at this. Almost there. Okay. Nick's not here today, but hopefully he would be proud of me. We can almost get that all in there. Okay, now the other thing, this is straight out of Jay Cooey from Gigahome Biologics, and I noticed I was watching something he did a couple of weeks ago, and he was using a CTTM Alan Watt business card. This is a bookmark, and I thought, oh, I'm going to use that. So here we go. Hollywood didn't make on-the-nose pro-communist films because that would have been far too obviously propagandistic and hence not good propaganda. But they made and make a great many movies about the labor movement, the class struggle, the imperfections of non-communist society, implicitly denying the Christian belief that human society is inevitably imperfect because of the fall and original sin, racial tensions, which were apparently unique to the Free West, the problems with capitalism, even though in contrast to common ownership of the means of production, it usually works pretty good. The problems with religion, such as bigotry, small-mindedness, hypocrisy, anti-communism, most notably anti-Vietnam War films, but also anti-conservative and anti-McCarthy films like Good Night and Good Luck and many others. Minimizing communism by treating it in a comical, satirical, or lighthearted manner, such as Ninochka. I can't remember the famous actress that starred in that, but they remade it as a comedy called Silk Stockings, Comrade X, The Russians Are Coming, Hail Caesar. These are all comedies. Hail Caesar was done in 2018, and I believe that had George Clooney in it. I did not see it. The Death of Stalin, 2017, with Steve Buscemi as Khrushchev, and whitewashing historical communists, most recently Oppenheimer. And it could be argued that Hollywood's biggest ever overarching project has been to tear down the Christian sexual constitution, promoting feminism, free love, abortion, etc., which is also a project of the communists and the left generally. They and the rest of the literary culture glamorized the left in the Spanish Civil War. The movie Reds glamorized the Russian Revolution. They very seldom tell the truth about communist atrocities. The most famous mention of a communist atrocity, the killing fields, about Pol Pot murdering almost 2 million people, or almost a third of the population of Cambodia, is blamed on Richard Nixon because some U.S. bombing of the Ho Chi Minh Trail during the Vietnam War fell on Cambodia. This is an example of the big lie. Pol Pot was a committed communist who studied Marxism in Paris, like legions of others. He came to power in 1975, almost 3 years after the Americans left and the bombing stopped. Yet Hollywood manages to blame his genocide on the U.S. Tell me that isn't naked communism. So that, I appreciate my brother for sending me that insight onto it. And I'll just show you this, then I'll try to switch over my screen. He also sent me this, which I'll supply the link when I upload the film later, but it's from a site called workersliberty.org. This is a left-leaning site. And this is a compilation that they made of what they called left-wing films. And you'll notice that this was done in 2014. So there have been a lot of left-leaning films since then. And this is History of the Left, Socialist Realism. But I wanted to flip through this on the camera because I printed it out. I wanted you to see how long, because you don't get the imagery when you're just looking at the web page. I printed out 31 pages double-sided. So it came out at 16 pages of left-leaning films that they claim promote their cause as of 10 years ago. So now what I am going to do is attempt to switch my screen here. And so bear with me because this is all really new. And I can't seem to find where there we go. Okay, hopefully we are all now looking at this list of left-wing films here. And I will start to scroll through it. And I can't see the screen that I have up on the screen share, but I've taken a peek. Okay, it looks like it is scrolling. So
it's all good.
Yeah, so this list goes way back, and I'm just going to highlight a few things. Like I said, it's 32 pages, but I wanted to highlight some things that we might not necessarily might not necessarily think of as communist promoting, Marxist promoting, left-wing films. Obviously, something like Reds or Rosa Luxemburg, we can see, or Seeing Red. But let's just get into some things. I'm not sure that we would see Sammy and Rosie Get Laid as a communist ideology, but it's an interracial couple who deal with life in Thatcher's England. The Alien movies, the left claims these as showing the unrestrained capitalism and monopolistic, deceptive, and inhuman. So I'm just giving you an idea of what the left sees as how they've promoted their ideology over the years. Something like Norma Rae. This is obvious. Oops, I can't seem to just highlight Norma Rae, but this is a labor struggle from, what was that, nearly 50 years ago now. On the waterfront, this is also labor unions. So these kind of things are obvious. But Tucker, the man in his dream, this is about a guy who had an idea to design a car. So we don't think about that as promoting leftism. Braveheart, his struggle against British imperialism. So they claim that. Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, I think was the full name of that. Anything, this is interesting to me, and Oppenheimer, obviously, the latest one won't be on this list because that just came out. But here is Fat Man and Little Boy. Paul Newman stars in this movie about the development and deployment of the atomic bomb. Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls, of course, that makes sense because it's his adventures in the Spanish Civil War. Killing Fields, again, my brother referenced that in the email that he sent me. But the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, we would not think of that as a left-leaning, left-promoting film, but the left does. And this goes on and on. Like I say, it's 32 pages. Go into this folder here where I've saved a few things. And one of the people that I wanted to highlight in this preamble is Senator Joseph McCarthy. Okay, so you should just be seeing a picture now. Two men sitting very close together at a table. Yeah. The man, you got that? Okay. So the man with his hand on the microphone is McCarthy. The man whispering in his ear is Roy Cohn. And Roy Cohn was a lawyer. And this is significant for a lot of reasons. Roy Cohn, wrote a book about McCarthy and his time as his advisor. And later, like 30 years later, he became the consigliere, I guess you could say, the right-hand man attorney to Donald Trump. And there were accusations, of course, and I believe those accusations are quite true, that he was mobbed up, that he was in with the mob. And the reason why he became instrumental in Trump's business world, and Trump, I guess, at one point called him his best friend, was because of Cohen's mob connections. And he knew all of the builders because, you know, let's just face it, New York City building is mob. And so he helped Trump with some projects and Trump's father. And this ultimately led to him being very instrumental with helping with the building of Trump Tower. And I was listening to an interview about the making of a documentary about Roy Cohn, and it said an example of Roy Cohn's help to Trump was that if you look at the construction of Trump Tower, it was not done in the typical steel beam. I don't have the building architecture terminology for it, but it was not done in the way that most high rises are done, but it was done with a concrete infrastructure. And the reason why that's not typical to New York City is because evidently the mob controls concrete. And if they want to slow you down, get extra money from you, they just make their concrete machines unavailable to you for a day or two until your concrete mix is ruined. It's unusable. But Cohen helped Trump navigate that world. So now that I've kind of laid that out there, I'll back up and explain why I think this is significant. In this book, Quigley dedicates 4 or 5 or 6 pages to what is essentially a character assassination of Joseph McCarthy. And that's easy pickings because McCarthy became an ism. It was McCarthyism, and that's red baiting, that's witch trials, witch hunt. Everyone is a communist. That was McCarthy. But as I read this and was looking into McCarthy and specifically Cohen, I formulated my own idea about what might have happened. And it's along the lines of that McCarthy was more or less a political figurehead, that our key player here in the House Un-American hearings was, or HUAC, I believe it was House Un-American Committee, was Cohen. And I'm not sure who Cohen was getting his orders or, talking points from. But when we look at that picture, what I'm seeing is the conciliary, the made man attorney, whispering in the ears of Senator Joseph McCarthy, this is what we do, this is what you say next. And it's important, when I get into bullet pointing, I will tell you why I think that there is some significance here, because this was the key thing, the whole hunting out communists in the government and also in the entertainment industry and in even academia and business. This, to me, really feels like a piece of carefully orchestrated theater. And I'm going to just quickly, if I am able to, I'm going to quickly give us some other pictures here. And what I will do is, can we see this on my screen share that I've switched pictures here? This is just a different angle of Cohen.
Yep, perfect.
Okay, super, great. And this is Donald Trump and Cohen, a little bit older. See, he was a young man here. And here with Trump, he is sitting on the sidelines. He's got a big stack of papers under his nice gold watch. And we can see that we have different radio, possibly television networks. That might be CNN, I'm not sure. But they are interviewing Trump, and he is right there, his right-hand man. And that is what Trump called him, his right-hand man, his best friend, etc. And here's another picture of them just out and about on the town. Perhaps that's Ivana, Trump's first wife behind him. We don't know. Blonde lady in a sequin dress. But that is Trump, and that is Roy Cohn. Okay, so let's see what else I have to get into in preamble-ish stuff, and then I'll come back. I'll be reworking some of these things when I start talking. Just an interesting little thing here on Cohen and Trump. Trump described him as his best friend. this is just a little interesting bit of trivia. I have not seen the documentary entitled Where's My Roy Cohn? And I believe this came out last year or the year before or the year before that. It's not very, very old. I haven't seen it. It seems to lean very left. But what I did see was an interview with Amy Goodman and the director of the documentary, whose name I don't recall. But Amy Goodman, I just mentioned that because she really is and has been the face of Democracy Now! News outlet for years and years and years and years, many, many years. When Alan Watt would reference The List, General Wesley Clark's The List, he revealed that list, and the clip that Alan played and shared with you repeatedly, that was an interview that Wesley Clark did on Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. And when Amy Goodman is sitting there talking to the director, it has this, it's almost a kind of a virtue signaling thing. And I'm sure that you've all seen it when one side or the other is sure that their position is morally superior. It's a kind of a smug, it's just, we're smug, we're in the know, and Roy Cohn, what a creep he was and how evil he was, and Senator McCarthy, what a creep he was and how evil he was. And anyway, that's interesting. And one last bit of trivia on this relationship is that Roy Cohn was quite a closeted homosexual in the period, the 1940s, 50s, 60s. And they both claim best friendness, he and Donald Trump, but it's pretty well documented that when Cohen was dying of AIDS, Donald Trump stepped way, way, way back. And this seems to have been a hurt to Roy Cohn, but he did not stand by his friend, his very best friend in the whole world. And one other little interesting thing that I discovered in watching that documentary about, about the film Where Is My Roy Cohn is the Roger Stone, who was called by them a political fixer. We saw a lot of Roger Stone. Alex Jones on InfoWars featured him regularly in the campaign back in 2016 for Donald Trump. And then his home in Florida was raided and so forth. But it is well documented, and in fact, Roger Stone says it himself, but it's corroborated, that he was also mentored by Roy Cohn. So just some little interesting things there. Let's see if I can get here next here. Michael Straight. Now, I'm switching gears here for a moment. But Michael Straight factors into my bullet points here. He was an American magazine publisher. So I want you to think about the significance of the media, not just film and Hollywood entertainment, but magazines, newspapers, and leading journalists, both in front of the camera or in front of the microphone on radio or behind, and the very prominent role that they play both as so-called fellow travelers or as communists or fighting communists. In other words, we're looking at a tightly controlled situation here where the so-called conflict, the so-called Cold War, is very well managed at a higher level than what we see unless we really pull the camera back and take that close look. So Michael Whitney Straight came from, I'm just going to look at my notes. I'm not going to switch the camera, but I am going over to my handwritten notes here. And his father was Willard Straight. Willard Straight had attended the Paris Peace Conference, but he died there of pneumonia. But more significantly than attending the Paris Peace Conference was that he attended that conference as an agent of J.P. Morgan and Co. Willard Strait's wife was Dorothy Strait, and it was her money that funded some of the family's operations. And I did not have time to see where that, what Dorothy Strait's maiden name was or where the money came from, but that's the Strait family. So Michael Strait, born in 1916, died in 2004, was an American magazine publisher, novelist, patron of the arts, a member of the prominent Whitney family, and a confessed spy for the KGB. So it gives you a bit of a background. And then as we go down here to career, it says, while a student at Trinity College, Cambridge, in the mid-1930s, Strait became a Communist Party member and a part of an intellectual secret society known as the Cambridge Apostles. Strait worked for the Soviet Union as part of a spy ring, whose members included Donald McLean, Guy Burgess, Kim Philby, and KGB recruiter Anthony Blunt. So these are 4 of the 5, the famous British spies. A document from Soviet archives of a report that Blunt made in 1943 to the KGB states, as you already know, the actual recruits whom I took were Michael Strait, and he goes on to say who else was there, and I didn't deem it necessary to highlight that. Okay, that was the end of the thought there. But that he was one of the actual recruits that Anthony Blunt took in. So he finished. The family was located in Britain at the time, and he stood for Parliament unsuccessfully. But then he came back in the late 30s to the U.S., worked as a speechwriter for Franklin D. Roosevelt. And this is significant too, because how many times have we heard Alan Watts say, I really don't care who the politician is. I think the Academy Award should go to the speechwriter. We should find out who the speechwriters are. Well, there we know now who Roosevelt's speechwriter was. He also went on to work for the U.S. State Department on the Eastern Division. And then he took over in 1942 the New Republic, which was owned by his family. And in this section, the American Confusions, Quigley covers this quite a bit, the whole New Republic founding and the political jostling that took over there, and Strait's involvement in backing a man who was a communist to run against Truman, and then kind of backing away at the last minute. And Quigley speculates, was this a setup? He said, we've got Strait working together with the communists, and I'm not sure if I've got that right in front of me here, but you've got the members of the extreme left working together to promote this guy Wallace. And here's what Quigley said. So Mike Strait is now anti-communist, ? Backing Henry Wallace for presidential bid in an attempt to defeat Truman. Strait, Wallace, and the communists worked together. And because of this, great damage was done to the communists. And I won't focus on that too much, because I'm going to come back in just a moment and hit it on the bullet points here. But this last bit on the screen that I have up right now said, Strait served as the deputy chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts from 1969 to 1977. And I'm just going to hit on the National Endowment for the Arts for a moment. He published in 1988 a book entitled Nancy Hanks, An Intimate Portrait, which told the story of the second chairman for the National Endowment of the Arts with whom he had worked. So here is somebody who is a communist, who was recruited by one of the Cambridge Five. And he's never punished. He's only rewarded. I mean, that's a fact. And then he's in the U.S., and then he's working in government, and then he's running a very influential magazine. But it's this period here of like 8 years there where he ran the National Endowment for the Arts. Here is an image that I have up here, a screenshot. Why do conservatives want the government to defund the arts? This is from 2017, and I'm just going to have us glance at the first couple of sentences here. Recent reports indicate that Trump administration officials have circulated plans to defund the National Endowment for the Arts, putting this agency on the chopping block again. Conservatives have sought to eliminate the NEA since the Reagan administration. In the past, arguments were limited to the content of specific state-sponsored works that were deemed offensive or immoral, an offshoot of the culture wars. Here is something that Alan Watt has talked about before, and this was funded by the NEA. Now, granted, this is not under Straight's watch because he was there from 69 to 77, but he was publishing a book about the NEA in 1988. In 1987, this piece was funded by the NEA called Immersion, or Piss Christ, photographed by the American artist and photographer Andres Serrano. It depicts a small plastic crucifix submerged in a small glass tank of the artist's urine. The piece was a winner of the Southeastern Center for Contemporary Arts Awards in the Visual Arts competition, which was sponsored in part by the National Endowment for the Arts, a United States government agency that offers support and funding for artistic projects. The work generated much controversy based on assertions that it was blasphemous. Serrano said of the controversy, "I had no idea Piss Christ would get the attention it did. Since I meant neither blasphemy nor offense by it, I've been a Catholic all my life, so I'm a follower of Christ." Well, art, they say, is in the eye of the beholder. This is Andres Serrano, the self-professed Roman Catholic whose work is considered transgressive. And transgressive art is the way this is described. This is art that shocks and offends purposely. So there you go. His work includes photos of corpses. He uses feces and bodily fluids. So that is the kind of thing that the NEA funded and still funds. And if you look up the government, the U.S. government, National Endowment for the Arts, you'll just be amazed at the kinds of art that they support. So this section, which I'm just going to go through the bullet points, there will be a combination of looking at the actual book itself and then also my notes, which as I look for things, I will share those with you. So just read a little bit here at the top, and we'll try not to do too much reading here. I'll go back to my little cutting through the matrix book club here, bookmark. The American response to the Soviet refusal of post-war cooperation was confused and tentative. For months after the Truman administration recognized the situation, it was reluctant to make any public announcement of this fact because our military demobilization could not be reversed until it had run its course in 1947 and until a new strategic system and consequent military organization could be reached. Here we learn what Rob already shared with us. Winston Churchill claims credit for coining the term Iron Curtain in a June 1946 speech. But the one who really seems to have popularized that was the journalist Walter Lippmann. And I'm going to be getting into Walter Lippmann a little bit later. It was also the British initiative over Greece and Turkey at the end of the war, which led to the Truman Doctrine of March 1947. Now, this came up in the section of reading that Rob was covering, but on page 898, earlier in the chapter, here is the Truman Doctrine defined. It must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. And this made me think of something that Alan brought to our attention repeatedly, was the idea that the West, particularly the U.S., but the West was, quote, bringing democracy, end quote, to the rest of the world. And it also made me think of Ronald Reagan's advisor, Gene Kirkpatrick, who had the idea that, it was costly to deploy troops to various regions to either take over or borrow some other country's military base. It would just be more cost effective and a better policy if the U.S. just set up a bunch of military bases all over the world. And I kind of took that right back to the Truman Doctrine, that another idea that's going to come up is containment, which is let's not let this, red menace spread further. But I think that the policy of being a supporter of free peoples resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressures has been a key part of U.S. foreign policy forever. So just going to turn over here to some of the bullet points. One of the issues that was going on in the different armed military divisions was the idea of universal military training. And the universal military training idea was that we needed highly trained reserve units. And the Air Force said, no, we don't need that, because anything that happens, World War III, it's going to be over before it starts, because air resistance or Air Force power will take over any ground force before it can be mobilized. So I'm not going to get deeply into this. I'm hoping that you've all read this or skimmed it or listened to an audiobook so you know what's going on. But we've got quite a lot in the first part of this chapter that is about attempts to reorganize and kind of coalesce the different branches of the U.S. military. But one key thing that I do want to highlight here is when the reorganization was going on, there were three major parts of it. And these three major parts still factor in so much into how the U.S. and the U.S. works internally and in foreign policy that it is worth naming them. They are the unification of the armed services, the creation of the National Security Council as an advisory board to the president, and the National Security Council is huge, very important, and the reorganization of the whole system of intelligence and spying through the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, and the code-breaking National Security Agency, the NSA. And so those are some key points there. The National Security Act of 1947 set up a system that was based on secrecy and anonymity. and its three major parts I just covered: the National Security Council, the NSC, the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, and the National Security Agency, or the NSA. Now, remember that that's, I'm just blanking on his name right now, but it's NSA, whistleblower that has been living in Russia for a decade and a half, and so that might be on the tip of somebody's tongue. But these are still important.
Edward Snowden.
Oh, thank you. Thanks very much. So old Edward Snowden was saying, hey, look, the heads of other governments are being spied on by the NSA. The average American citizen is being spied on by the NSA. So the NSA is the big ears and the big eyes that see everything. And they started as a code-breaking national security agency, breaking code during the war. And I'll come back to a few more significant points on that. Just skipping, I'm actually going to be skipping several pages until right now I'm on 9/11, and I'm going to be 9/11. I'm going to be skipping over to 9/16, but I wanted to just mention quickly here that Quigley writes that there are three events that shape the next decade. He's at 1949 here. He calls one the B-36 crisis, which is also known as the B-36 affair. And this was building, I think it was a carrier that was obsolete before it was even built and acknowledged to be obsolete. What we've already heard Rob mention just a little bit, the so-called loss of China to communism, and the secret H-bomb crisis, and then finally the creation of NATO. That's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And this was actually already covered in Rob's section, and I won't go backwards, but if you want to, you can go back and absorb that again, because NATO, of course, factors in heavily to what's going on now in Europe. And then the idea of containment, which, as I said, this is limiting the scope and the impact of the spread of communism. And so, page 916, I wanted to just read a little bit of a paragraph here. And that is, if the bookmark is really annoying to you, you can tell me, but otherwise I'll use it as a guide here. It is still impossible to make any real assessment of the influence of communists, either in government or out of it, in the period of 1949 to 1950, with which we are now concerned. This is equally true of the earlier years, going back to 1933, with which most of the charges and counter-charges made in 1949 were concerned. The chief reason for this is that secrecy, which still prevails, was used by both sides to portray, by selective publicity, a false picture. Falsehood, manipulation, selection, and distortion of evidence were prevalent on both sides and were used especially by the anti-communists, not because they were less addicted to the truth than communists, but because they, on the offensive, were the ones who were raising the issues and exposing the evidence. Apparently, these anti-communists, including the press, the House Committee on Un-American Activities, or HUAC, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, felt that a good cause justified shoddy or misleading methods. Now, there is one thing that I wanted to say here, and that is that it's very hard sometimes to gauge where Quigley is coming from, because he is the one who is writing this organization. That's the Royal Institute of International Affairs / Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, is willing to use any group or any organization to further its causes. But you still I speak for myself here, I still get the sense that Quigley speaks and writes a more left-leaning line here. And that makes sense because Bill Clinton, called Quigley one of his most important mentors. But he's saying here, how do we assess the influence of the communists? It's just so hard. Then going on to page 919, he makes a distinction here, which I think is interesting. And that distinction is, it looks like I wanted to read something. Sorry. No, I did that already. Okay. It's a gross exaggeration. I can't find where. I might try this here on page 918. I was looking for a quote, but I don't. Yeah, it's right here. Okay, this is on page 918. Quigley writes, these anti-communists, some of them professionals, tried to demonstrate that the CPUS, that's a Communist Party, United States, so the CPUS, by its penetration into the federal government under the New Deal, into labor unions or education, and into entertainment, especially Hollywood, had gravely endangered the nation. On the whole, from the perspective of decades, these charges concerned with the period before 1945 seem grossly exaggerated. On the other hand, the making of these charges in the period 1947 to 1955 was very damaging to the country. The influence of communists within or outside government had been slight. It is, for example, almost impossible to find a single motion picture, book, or play which can be identified as having had influence in leading Americans to feel favorably toward a communist system for this country. It is even difficult to find examples of such an effort. On the other hand, it is possible to find examples of books which gave a too favorable impression of the Soviet Union, just as it is possible to find favorable books on any country. And I'll leave that alone. But I think that we can demonstrate easily for ourselves if we just think about entertainment, for an example. Does a movie need to say, oh, hey, let's all move to the Soviet Union because and share our wealth equally? In order to be a pro-communist movie, or influencing Americans to feel favorably toward a communist system for the country. And I don't think so. I think that we can just look around and see the fruits of the damage that has been done that Quigley goes out of his way to minimize. Now, I am going to stop sharing the screen and I'm going to share something that Neil Foster sent me a couple of days ago, which was ironic.
If I may, I'd like to make a quick point as well.
Sure.
I bought this book. Can you see it? No, you're not. No, you can. Can you see it? No. This book is a Dorling Kindersley book. And they're obviously London, New York publisher, and I'm not a fan of, even if I live in Germany and moved to Germany on purpose, I'm not a fan of Adolf, but it clearly states in the book that he killed like 7 million people, and then you turn over the page and there's all of the communist regime, Mao and Stalin and all of them listed, and there is no number of deaths that were caused by that person. There's just another example of how lying by omission is used in favor of the communist side, that they just don't say how terrible they were, It's like, yeah, and the Cold War happened, and that was it. I'm like, no, that's they killed a shed load of people. They let loads of people starve in the Ukraine in the 1920s, and there's no mention of it. So it's not just Hollywood, but also, like Melissa said, in books that they just warp the truth, as it were. And like everybody knows Adolf killed 6 to 7 million like gypsies, Jews, whatever. And that was terrible, but then you can't just not tell people about the other murderers of the 20th century. And I find that like that kind of fitting. I had to Google it as soon as Melissa was saying that like the bias towards red is so obvious, although it's not in your face, it's definitely there. That's my point. Right. Back to the thing.
Okay. So I just want to confirm that we can see an article that I am looking at called House Overwhelmingly Passes Crucial Communism Teaching Act. So if we can't see that, then I'll bring it up. But this is
we can see your screen.
Okay, great. This is something that was just published, the Epic Times, whatever. But it's quite funny. This was just published about a week ago or so. I wonder if you can see here that it was co-sponsored by 33 members of the House. So it said communism is one of the most destructive political ideologies the world has ever seen, says Representative Elvira Salazar, Republican Florida, when she introduced the bill earlier this year. The crucial Communism Teaching Act is important because our youth must remember the crimes of the communists, including those inflicted upon my constituents and their families in Florida's 27th district. So she goes on to say how many people suffered, the deaths of 100,000 victims worldwide, could be more than that, and many, many more people are still suffering under communism. When Neil sent that to me, he made the comment, he said, are they mocking us now? Because I remember... growing up, I've mentioned this before, we had to get under our desks for the drills, the training of what would happen if there was a bomb, like a desk is going to save you from a nuclear explosion. And you had a disconnect that I saw very clearly when I was young. Even in my own family and my parents, I didn't understand exactly what it was then. But you've got Hollywood, which sets the culture for America and really for the world, but for America, who mocks the idea that communism is a threat. They do it in comedic films, etc. They had also, not many years earlier, vilified McCarthy and made an ism called McCarthyism for looking for people who were spies, what Quigley calls in this book, what all historians call the atomic spies, those who were guilty of sharing scientific and nuclear secrets with other countries. And so you've got a very real Cold War played out at a certain level while your main media and newspapers and magazines and so forth are mocking it and minimizing the risk. You've had what is clearly a de facto takeover of the world's culture, certainly the U.S., but the world as well, with what is obviously Marxist ideology, Frankfurt School ideology, and that it's a done deal. But now they're introducing a bill, and that was Neil's point. Are we being mocked here? Because, here, this is a bill that's going to sponsor education, gaps in the education system. But I can tell you my own experience, because I've had this happen twice until I made a note, don't do that again. I've made videos for a certain channel where I used footage that was silenced out, no speaking or anything, but footage from an excellent documentary that Alan has mentioned many times called The Soviet Story, which really shows you the brutal reality of communism and the Soviet system. And I have had that video blocked on my channel for being too graphic. And yet, as I've also pointed out, one can easily find, without age restriction, films of people undergoing gender reassignment surgery, graphic film without an age restriction. No warning that this is graphic. No, because this is the authorized, I'm sorry, but the gender dysphoria, the gender reassignment surgery really is the Lysenkoism of the West. It's the scientific madness or the scientism madness of the West. So we're under it. If I can't even show you footage of the Soviet story, do we have any hope that children in schools are going to be taught anything about the realities of the Soviet system? I don't think so. I don't know when I lost my screen there, but I'm just going to bullet point through my bullet points. I'm just going to hammer through them really quickly. So I've mentioned the fear of atomic power. And this is the point, I think that Greg has left the chat, but this is the point that he was making, that fear was the desired outcome. And certainly the people of the world and America were living under a huge fear of atomic energy. And there was outrage from the Americans that the nuclear secrets were being sold and traded by spies. And in this, what I call a character assassination of McCarthy, I'm skipping quite a bit now to 934. And this is the HUAC and those and the different committees that were related to HUAC being highlighted by Quigley here. He gives a quote from Vice President Nixon, who said, "We're kicking the communists and fellow travelers and security risks out of the government by the thousands. It was soon clear," Quigley writes, "that no known communists were kicked out, and that security risks included all kinds of persons, such as those who imbibed too freely at Washington's endless cocktail parties. A communist in the State Department would have been a prize among this motley group, but none was announced." Some of you might be aware of what I'm just about to switch my screen and show you, and that is the Venona Project. So the Venona Project was a United States counterintelligence program initiated during World War II by the United States Army's Signal Intelligence Service and later absorbed by the National Security Agency, right? We covered that, and Edward Snowden and the code-breaking function that the NSA started for. It ran from February the 1st, 1943 until October the 1st, 1980. That's a long stretch of time, the Venona Project. It was intended to decrypt messages transmitted by the intelligence agencies of the Soviet Union, the NKVD, the KGB, and the GRU. Initiated when the Soviet Union was an ally of the U.S., the program continued during the Cold War when the Soviet Union was considered an enemy. During the 37-year duration of the Venona Project, the Signal Intelligence Service decrypted and translated approximately 3,000 messages. The signal's intelligence yield included discovery of the Cambridge 5 espionage ring in the United Kingdom, and also of the Soviet espionage of the Manhattan Project in the U.S., known as Project Enormous. Some of the espionage was undertaken to support the Soviet atomic bomb project. The Venona project remained secret for more than 15 years after it concluded. Some of the decoded Soviet messages were not declassified and published by the United States until 1995. What you will hear when you listen to the director of Where Is My Roy Cohn talking to Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! Is this outrage that Ethel Rosenberg was executed along with her husband Julius for spying during the Second World War. And the director of that film makes the assertion that it has never been unequivocally proved or demonstrated that Ethel was also a spy. And we're even casting some doubt on, at least this director of the film was casting doubt on whether even Julius Rosenberg was a spy. Now here, this is just a wiki page on Venona. It said, Venona has added significant information to the case of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, making it clear Julius was guilty of espionage, and also showing that Ethel, while not acting as a principal, still acted as an accessory who took part in Julius's espionage activity and played a role in the recruitment of her brother for atomic espionage. So Venona, what Quigley is saying, and of course this book was written in 1966, and the Venona Project messages were not declassified until 1995. And as you know, Alan says, they always wait until nobody's alive who even cares anymore. But in this instance, a lot of people do care, and a lot of the caring still comes from the left. See, I'm just going down names that are all mentioned in this section, which because of time, I'm not going to take the time to mention them all, but the Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were mentioned. Klaus Fuchs, Harry Gold, Alger Hiss, Harry Dexter White. Wthese all factored into the section that I'm reading. And yet still here, there were 3,000 decoded, right? So if you put your best people on analyzing these messages, you're probably going to have a very accurate assessment of what they're saying. It's not like we're looking at 3 million or even 30,000 files or messages, but 3,000. But it is still being put across in the media that that this is not reliable, that that the Venona material is being used to distort our understanding of the Cold War, and the files are potential true time bombs of misinformation. So you can't win here. In other words, when so much of what was happening, exposing espionage and exposing communists, has proven to be accurate, the spin is still no, that, you know, it's really hard to interpret these, and it's built right in there. I want to find this one Shire, I think his name is, the Schneers conclude here. And they are using something that was stated by Belmont, A.H. Belmont, who was an assistant to the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, back in the 50s, 1956. He wrote this memorandum, and he said, almost anything included in a translation of one of these deciphered messages may in the future be radically revised. Therefore, he concludes, a reader faced with Venona's incomplete, disjointed messages can easily arrive at a badly skewed impression. So there we go. The need to say that we've always been safe from communism in this country is still ongoing. Okay, let me just go back here to my screen and see what I am sharing. You got intellectuals have said democracy is failing for a century. That takes us to Walter Lippmann. I don't want to keep us too long, so I'm just going to return to my notes here for a moment. And without reading too much here, I want to just say that an important part of this section is the idea that the CIA and some of these families that we see, like Straight, Dorothy Straight, her son Mike Straight, Vanderbilt money, Whitney money, what you're going to see here is a lot of involvement with the Anglo-American establishment in art. And so it's not just film, it's not just the control of the newspapers and the magazines, but it's the control of specifically modern art. That's where I was speaking earlier about the National Endowment for the Arts, to change what we consider to be art. This is highly and well documented in a book that Alan mentioned quite a few times, entitled The Cultural Cold War, the CIA and the World of Arts and Letters. And this is written by Francis Stoner Saunders. And in the UK, this book was entitled Who Paid the Piper? And it is an excellent source if you want to have a deep exploration of how the CIA funded the arts all through the post-World War II period. And this is, I believe she covers it up until the 70s. I'm not sure. I didn't have time to crack it open and pick up that pertinent point again. But David Rockefeller's mother, I believe her name was Abigail, was the one who started the New York Museum of Modern Art. This is the most influential modern art museum in the United States. I just mentioned Mike Straight, and he came from the Whitney family. The Whitney Museum is another cornerstone of the art world in the United States. Later on in the chapter, I don't have time to get into him, but there is a character by the name of Lamont. And what you see is big money funding the arts for political or propagandistic purposes. What Francis Stoner Saunders demonstrates in this book, The Cultural Cold War, is how the CIA used this in presenting the so-called Western way of life, the agenda that the West had chosen to promote to the rest of the world. But what she can't help but expose was that this was turned on the people of the West as well, obviously. So one of the important claims that she makes, which I think is true, and I think other writers have supported this as well, is that a key part of the intelligence community's involvement in the arts was to demonstrate to intelligentsia and the average man who was living in a Soviet bloc country that the West was a beacon of freedom, free speech, no censorship, ability to say anything or do anything that you wanted in the arts, as opposed to the oppressive culture in the Soviet Union. But the other side of that double-edged sword is the total contamination of Western cultures by, let's say, something like Piss Christ, not to mention things just too foul to be believed that have been funded by the U.S. So Quigley goes on to say on page 935, he's talking about the China lobby's contention that the American experts on China were organized into a single interlocking group, which had a general consensus of a leftish character. It is also true that this group, from its control of funds, academic recommendations, and research of public or publications opportunities, could favor persons who accepted the established consensus and could injure financially or in professional advancement persons who did not accept it. It is also true that the established group, by its influence on book reviewing in the New York Times, the Herald Tribune, the Saturday Review, a few magazines, including the so-called liberal weeklies, and in the professional journals, could advance or hamper any specialist's career. There's another key group here called the Institute of Pacific Relations, and I didn't have time to look to verify this, but I do believe that the Institute of Pacific Relations, which disbanded shortly after HUAC because of accusations of its communist bent and being a mouthpiece for China, I think that whatever it morphed into is now under the umbrella of organizations that are owned by George Soros and the Open Societies, but I didn't have time to confirm that. I had found that and then couldn't get back to it. So want to speed through because you've all been very patient, and Quigley's defense of this that I just was kind of explaining, he said, it is clear that many persons who were born in the period 1900 to 1920 and came to maturity in the period 1958 to 1940 were so influenced by their experiences of war, depression, and insecurity that they adopted more or less unconsciously certain aspects of the communist ideology, such as class struggle and human events, or the exploitative interpretation of the role of capital in the productive system and of the processing groups in society. He goes on to talk about how the extreme left wing that was promoted in the New York Times and by the connection here between the Round Table Group and the Morgan Bank. And I'm going to have to read a couple of these sections here because they're just too good to leave unsaid. But one thing which I'm not seeing in my notes, but because I have talked about the promotion of the arts by the wealthy families, and that's theater, that's painting, or that's dance. It is owned by this Anglo-American establishment. And Quigley makes a very good point here in this section about at least two families. And this made me think of Aldous and Julian Huxley, as Julian being the elder, the head of UNESCO, the, kind of the mouthpiece for UN goals and so forth. And Aldous, writing The Doors of Perception, tripping on LSD, and kind of promoting that. So he made the comment about two families of this period, that the elder son had taken a role of big political significance, and a younger son or sons were far left radical organizers or promoters of far left radical arts, etc. And I think this is a significant thing to keep in mind with these interlocking families, and that's a key part of this section here, is whatever they're telling you about the political theater that is going on, the McCarthy investigation, the House Un-American Activities Committee, is a kind of theater that they also are controlling. And this is what I thought when I was just listening to different people talk about Roy Cohn, thinking about his connections to subsequent families and empires such as the Trumps, is that I came to see him, everybody in the left will say mobbed up and McCarthy was just a psychopath. And even after 5 pages of character assassination that Quigley did on McCarthy, I came to the conclusion, well, it really seems to me that he's just describing the mindset of any politician who will do things for advantage, who will hold their finger up, lick their finger and hold it to see which way the wind is coming from. This is politics. But what you have with someone like the Cohen consigliere whispering in his ear, I thought of Machiavelli. The person behind the strings who's advising, and we don't know what group's for. But I don't think it's as easy and straightforward as just that awful man and his awful mobbed up lawyer whispering in his ear. I think it's something very different. And what I think is it's a kind of theater when you're behind the scenes players are all connected to Wall Street money, and JP Morgan and Co. was the big organization at the time. But the Morgan guy, I can't remember his name right now, but he's got a Greek last name. But the big play, probably one of the most powerful Wall Street people right now, is also connected to what, I think it's Morgan Chase or whatever it's called. But it's the same group of people. It's the same group of people. So you've got Wall Street money, American, British establishment, old families using the elder son to, he's the front man, banker / politics / agenda setter. The younger sons or daughters are, in the arts. They're promoting this or that under the name of philanthropy. It's a story that we know too well. So I'm just going to conclude here with a little bit of reading from the book. I did not get to talk about Lattimore. And Lattimore was interesting. I had some things on Lattimore and the Institute of Pacific Relations and the kind of folding in of some of those ideas. I mentioned Soros, but also in I think it's called the Social Science Research Council, which is one of the oldest foundations. It's over 100 years old now, and it's instrumental in shaping academic curricula, forever, and also contributing their graduates, so their alumni, their thinkers into politics. And the other thing that I won't have time to get into was Quigley did mention Foundations, Their Power and Influence, the Renee Wormser book. I don't think he gave it nearly as much importance as he should have. I don't think it fit the narrative that he wanted to deliver to us, because I think if you read Foundations, Their Power and Influence, you see the phalanx, the interlocking, militarized nature of this Wall Street money and these old established families, and their fingers in every pie in what Yale and Harvard or any Ivy League school is going to put across as its curriculum. What arts are going to get funded? They're just into everything. And I think a lot of what Wormser points out in Foundations, in a way, it kind of undermines some of Quigley's assertions about the let's just say not so damaging realities of, were there really spies, or was this a witch hunt? So just a couple of things that I wanted to mention, and then I'll read the last bit and be out. Things that I skipped over, just forgot to mention here. But in the reorganization, in the section that I mentioned right before the National Security Council, CIA, and NSA, he writes about, there was a need for American military policy to be re-coordinated, and he gives us a good detailed look at why this was problematic. But one thing that he does share with us is, we've got a good basis for the military-industrial complex here. They're retiring generals and other high-ranking military. They'd retire, let's say the average was $16,000 a year. And then they would leave to take a private sector, private industry job where their expertise in military would be useful, and they'd be getting their retirement benefits, plus they'd be getting their salary. So the highest one was about $100,000 in 1946. I looked up to see what the value with inflation of that money would be. So it would mean that a general, on average, was retiring out of the military on about $250,000 a year. That's what $16,000 was in 1946. So that $50,000 that they would get in the private industry, private sector, would be closer to $900,000 or even edging up towards $1 million. So all of these generals would be exiting their jobs post-World War II and bringing down about $1 million a year. And there was one that was even pulling down his retirement or disability plus about $100,000. So you're looking at somebody in 1946 in a military position who's making about $2 million a year in purchasing power. And I thought that was important to mention that, because the military-industrial complex is a thing. Now, I was pointing out to Rob when we were running through this yesterday, I said, see these red marks. This isn't the most marked up book. I've made a few marks here and there. That's not the most marked up.
Please show it.
Yes. Can
We've still got your web browser.
Oh, okay.
Up. But that was phenomenal to me. To see the man's handwriting and the marks. It was just like Holy Grail moment.
Okay. Oh, I had the web browser up, and that's Lippmann, but I failed to talk about him. I'm going to put up some links on Lippmann. Walter Lippmann is a round table protege. This is Rhodes Scholar, round table. He is their boy, and he became at the time, and Quigley even writes in this book, that he was about the most well-known, the most established, the most vetted, et cetera, journalist. So never discount journalism and magazines and newspapers and so forth. These people are key. Lippmann was key, very, very, very key. And I wish I had time to highlight him, but I don't. So, Lippmann wrote a famous book called Public Opinion. And until I got into this section and did a little bit more reading and homework about him, I kind of put him parallel with Bernays because of crystallizing public opinion. He also, just like Bernays, was with the Creel, I can't remember what the Creel, Creel, what the rest of that was, but this was at World War I kind of propaganda board. He was the one who was making President Wilson's 14 points of light speech kind of in the common everyday, talking points for the average American. So Lippmann was really an important player for many years, many years from the time he was a young man on. But I don't have time to get more into it. So now I'm going to go over here.
It's also, if you think of today, how Boris Johnson was first a journalist.
Yes.
Cool. We can see your screen
Okay.
now.
So this is Tragedy and Hope. And there aren't a lot of, here's Alan. There aren't a lot of, you should see, this is interesting about this book as many times as he talked about it, because you should see some books, his pen or my pen, all the way down the page. Every bit of white space tells you what page to go to, where to find what you're looking for in the book. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. Such a cited, often discussed book has relatively few notes in it. But basically, all the neat little red lines going down telling you, look at this whole paragraph and underlined and everything, that's Alan. Oligarchy dash money. And like I say, we're not seeing a lot of those notes in the margins, and he was huge for notes in the margin. And I used to treat books a little bit more sacredly, I guess you could say, and he'd be like, write it in the margin, put it in the index, I want to be able to find it. It's a book is a tool. So here you see he's got World Federalist Organization. And so just these different notes, but, look how many blank, completely clean pages, or maybe one little underline that I'm going through here as I'm flipping and trying to just show you when he marked, he meant it. So there's a lot of data, a lot of names and dates, and this is my own. I thought that was important. I got on Stimson. I was telling us all about Stimson for a couple of weeks, and so we will just see blank, 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 and all of a sudden, when we get to the section that I have been covering, American Confusions, a lot of blankness, and then the mighty red pen. The mighty red pen starts, and it goes page after page after page, and it would be great if I could do a Frank from Ireland and just really get in there and detail this whole section for you, but alas, I don't have that kind of time. But here we go with more markings, lots of things that Alan thought was very important about American Confusions. I can barely turn a page now from here to the end of the section where he's investigating who was in the roundtable groups. What was the roundtable group connection to communism, the kindergarten, civil servants, the role of the Morgan Bank, and financing things both in London and the U.S. So that is interesting. And here's him saying, this is important from here, got a star there, power and banks, or the power of banks. So that was something that caught Rob's attention, and so I'm sharing that with you. But I wanted to just close up this section with just a couple of mentions here, and I'll point you to places in the book where I think that I'm going to skip ahead and then skip backwards. I'm skipping ahead to page 9 5253, the Round Table, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and the CFR, or the Council on Foreign Relations, their connections to academia, the English establishment, and critically here, newspapers. Quickly mentions a lot of the newspapers that were kind of in their control. And I wanted to mention to you, I was not able to attend yesterday, but Nick of Hayes Reviews is covering the Milner-Fabian Conspiracy, a book by Ian Ratu. And he told me yesterday that the section was going to be on the CFR. I haven't had a chance to watch that one yet, but I think it will help us make some connections with this material that we just covered today. So that was Friday, the 13th of December, 2024 in Hayes Reviews. And if you've got a copy, even a PDF copy, and take yourselves to 952, 953, you'll find a lot of the papers and academic establishments that Quigley thought were worth highlighting. And then I mentioned just a few minutes ago, 954-55 is the connection of the Roundtable Group to academia, endowments, and then the Reese Committee. This is Foundations of Power and Influence. And essentially what Quigley writes here is that the American branch of the English establishment exerted its influence through 5 newspapers. And I think Alan has given us, and I believe that's true, they figured they needed about 30 newspapers, but I think that the key number was 5, filtering out to the 25 lesser. And there were some key magazines, most of which are still important. I remember that someone sent us some years back, I still have it somewhere, a 1962 edition from, I think, Life magazine. And it was one of those big kind of oversized magazines. And the whole cover of it, the whole issue was really, and this is 1962, it was really mocking what had come out of the McCarthy era, what had come out of the so-called Red Scare, and that so-called witch hunt. But what the average American is getting is there are still, a decade later, we're still told to go under our desks to hide from, a possible nuclear bomb explosion. So it was the dialectic, or the putting one idea forward and then nullifying it. The same establishment was doing that. The same establishment was telling you, children, get under your desks. The threat of a nuclear explosion is very real. Is the same establishment that is in charge of the 5 papers and the few magazines that are so essential into shaping our culture and what we think. From top down, there's a magazine or a newspaper for every level of society. If you are a member of the CFR, you're going to be looking at a certain set of newspapers and magazines. If you are in academia, you'll have your own. It's always been that way. It will always be that way. If you're Joe Public, you'll have your own papers and magazines that you read, but it is all controlled from the top. So I wanted to go back to 950, and then that will conclude what I share with us. So going over to 949, he's talking briefly about some of these papers, the plot, if we're to believe this myth. So the plot and the myth, this is this right-wing idea that extreme left-wing elements operating from the White House itself and controlling all the chief avenues of publicity in the United States to destroy the American way of life. Okay, so that's the plot. And the plot is worked out through avenues of publicity such as the New York Times, Herald Tribune, Christian Science Monitor, Washington Post, Atlantic Monthly, and Harper's Magazine. I think those are all still on the go. I'm not sure about Harper's, but the rest of them are still on the go. It's a plot, right? It's something in our imagination, something in Joe McCarthy's imagination. But he goes on to write on page 950, this myth, like all fables, does in fact have a modicum of truth. There does exist, and has existed for a generation, an international Anglophile network which operates to some extent in the way the radical right believes the communists act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the Round Table groups, has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other groups, and frequently does so. I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. And then a key point here, he says, for those of you who think he was actually exposing anything old quickly here, I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims, and have for much of my life been close to it and to many of its instruments. I have objected both in the past and recently to a few of its policies, notably to its belief that England was an Atlantic rather than a European power and must be allied or even federated with the United States and must remain isolated from Europe. But in general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown, and I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known. Then he goes on to write about the Eastern establishment, the Round Table groups, who's in them, the Cliveden set, and so on, where they came from with the Rhodes Trust. But this is something that Alan Watt has shared with us quite a few times, is that paragraph right there. So whatever spin Quigley and his team of writers put on things, that really is the key point. This modicum of truth is quite a bit more than a modicum. When you can read a few other things, books that other people in this book club have mentioned, Foundations of Power and Influence, and put them all together, you understand that the story that we're given on any episode in history is very different than the reality. So I think I'll conclude it there. Like I said, it was a huge section and really hard to do justice to, but I thank you all for bearing with us for the long run here. In January, Graham in Germany, Darren and I are splitting a couple of chapters, but before that, we have Lee, who is in Hong Kong, and I think that Lee and Darren and I, that's right. So this is upcoming, and we haven't set a date for covering it, but it will be in January. Nuclear Rivalry and the Cold War, the Race for the H-Bomb, 1950 to 1957. And Lee in the group is going to cover a section. I'm going to cover a section, then Lee will, and Darren. And we've got the rest of the book divided up amongst peoples. And so we're closing in on this, and I thank you all for being a part of this, which has been very educational to me. And that is all that I have to say. But if anybody wants to add anything, pipe up, please do.
Hi, Dan here. Thank you very much to the excellent effort this afternoon. I just wanted to add a couple of points. Sometimes when we're looking at things, it's always good to look at the other side of the story. And I've recently watched documentaries called Hellstorm, Europa, and I've looked at some of David Irving's work. And he they look at all the angles or provide the angle that we're not familiar with, and that's the German angle. One of the things that wasn't mentioned is the Rhine-Wazenlager, which was the American prison camps for German prisoners that was managed by Eisenhower. and there were 1.5 million German soldiers starved to death. And it's not common knowledge. I'm very sure that the author would have been aware of this. And that in itself is a tragedy. The last time I spoke about General Patton, and I was always been wondering why he was murdered. Patton voiced protest at the way the Russians and Americans treated their prisoners, so that might have contributed to his downfall. The other thing that was left out that is sort of obvious is in that same time period in 1948, there was the Nakba in Israel, where 750,000 Palestinians fled. There were plenty of rapes and massacres, and that somewhat mirrors some of the activity going on today. The other thing that struck me as very odd was the emphasis, the focus on McCarthyism. At the same time, they're running Operation Paperclip. Now, just think about that. So they're bringing in distinguished German scientists, and at the same time, they're persecuting Americans and executing people for being spies. The other little tidbit I came across when they were talking, he was talking about Milner's kindergarten. There was a gentleman by the name of Robert Henry Brand, who was affiliated with Lazar Brothers Bank. He also edited or was the editor of Round Table magazine, which was a prominent publication for that group at the time. He had a son, Robert James Brand, that passed away, born in 1923, and passed away in the war in 1945. The interesting thing is there's a current commentator with the same last name, with the same middle name, Henry. His father's name was Ronald Henry Brand, and he was a photographer. And when I tried to look at his family background, I couldn't find anything. Things fell off. So if we think that this group isn't running today and the same tricks aren't happening, we're being very naive. I have a whole bunch of notes here, but I think that's all I have to say. And, any feedback that you have for me would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Dan, were you hinting at Russell Brand?
Yes.
I also
Russell
did a
Henry
search
Brand.
and I couldn't find anything. I actually, I can't remember what I did with it, but I actually did find a link that was indirect. One of the of his, if they are related, one of the brands, the younger brands, had a mistress, a second wife, and she was a society lady. I don't know quite how she was with other elites, but I wish I still had her picture, because she is the spitting image of Russell Brand, and I wish I could remember where I got it from. There definitely is a link, but it's not through the male side. More so, I think it's a second wife of one of the brands, and you could the similarity is almost 90% perfect. Imagine an elderly sort of upper class woman who looks like Russell Brand. So he is related.
Yeah, and I strongly urge people to watch Hellstorm. It's on BitChute. Europa is a very, very long season. And if you want a juxtaposition, listen to Europa while you're reading Quigley. Because basically there's a whole other side of the story that we've never been told. David Irving, in Canada, we had a character by the name of Ernst Zundel, and he was jailed for his anti-Semitism, and there was numerous court cases, and he would bring David Irving in as an expert witness and won most of his court cases. But in his last court case, David Irving was doing a presentation in Toronto, and the RCMP rounded him up afterwards and threw him out of the country, and thus he wasn't able to provide expert testimony at the trial. So it's if you dig on this stuff, you realize that we're dealing with a bird with two wings, and it's just very interesting, and it's extremely challenging to remove your cognitive dissonance and your cognitive bias. But I strongly urge everybody to do that when they're looking at a situation, and especially when you're reading Quigley. He does leave out quite a bit of key happenings and details, and sometimes I mentioned this before. He's leaving breadcrumbs. He's artful. He's artful at this, because when you're speaking the truth, you can't do it all at once, or it falls down. And we're living through that now. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that input, and that is good sources to check out, good things to watch and look at. And Darren made the point a few months back that the more that we read, the more that we know, the easier it is for us to put together and even find some of these little missing pieces, or know, oh, there's a breadcrumb there that might be important. And in the Redux that I put up last Sunday, Alan said, if you don't know history, you're doomed. And he said, I don't mean you're doomed to repeat it. You're just doomed. So I think that's the importance of coming together and talking about this, and sharing resources and other ideas of what to explore and read with each other. Is there anybody else that wants to say anything before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I just would like to say thanks, Melissa and Rob and Dan, for your comments at the end. It was very interesting. Maybe you should consider participating in one of the chapters with Melissa and Darren and things like that. But thank you. That's it for me. Over and out.
I wanted to say thank you again for putting up with me. Basically, before I forget, whether you're religious or not, to have a nice third Advent weekend, and happy Christmas and a happy New Year. And I'll keep in touch in the group. If anyone wants to shoot me a message, feel free to do so. That's what the group's there for. And it was great fun. And now I am damn relieved to not have to do it again.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks very much.
Yes, and we did not. Oh, go ahead, Darren. Sorry.
Sorry, I wanted to, as Fiona mentioned earlier, Dan, would you like to step in for some of the future chapters that I'm booked in with Melissa? You could take my spot if you'd like.
I didn't want to make it seem that bad.
Dan, you're welcome to, because I've done a few, and the more that other people partake, is the better,
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Okay.
There's would be quite a bit of work involved for the way I would like to do things. I really have to commend the group on the progress, but because we went from straight reading to audio visual, and now we're actually having questions and participation. So the group has come along a long way. So yeah, we can talk about that, and I'd be happy to fill in. I'd really have to get up to date on Telegraph and how I could incorporate a presentation. That would be a bit of a challenge for me.
Dan, it's not any pressure, but take a look at the next 3 chapters and just see how your time horizon looks, and if you would be comfortable, and then just chat to Melissa or myself, and we can, arrange it.
I think that's a great. Dan, I was just going to say, if you want to email me, I can tell you what sections either I'm doing or Darren's doing that you can fill in for. Let's start with Darren's sections. I'll share those with you because we're splitting the chapters up into sections, which makes it a lot lighter and a lot less work. So you'd just probably be covering a section or maybe 2 sections at most, which makes it a lot easier. And regarding visuals or any kind of preparation like that, if you just come prepared to talk and you don't want to do all this screen sharing and anything like that, we'll illustrate it in the video. It's okay. It's nice to have the images to share with the group, but it is not essential. Just opening your mouth is the key part.
Okay, well, that sounds like a plan, and yeah, this even earlier today, I just wish there was a bibliography and footnotes, because I was reflecting on the current situation in Syria and Turkey, etc., and that was sort of covered in the beginning parts of the book. And believe me, with the state of geopolitics, this reading is very, very timely. And there's some strange coincidences and familiar patterns, let's say, that this book has been very helpful in illustrating. So, yeah, we can talk about it, and yeah, I'd be more than happy to help.
Great. Well, listen, go ahead, Darren.
I just wanted to add to what you said, Dan, is that once you've read this book a couple of times, what you see happening in today's world, you get a strong sense of deja vu wherever you look,
Yes. I tuned into the last chapter as well. I didn't comment. I probably should have. But the one thing that stood out to me about the last chapter is he was talking a lot about Taylor, but you can't mention Taylor time and motion studies without mentioning the Hawthorne studies, which was another omission. If anybody's familiar with the Hawthorne studies, they went into a plant and they were doing all these time and motion studies on the employees. And no matter what they did, if they turned the heat down and turned it up, or turned the lights down or turned the lighting up, the production kept on going up, and they couldn't figure out why. And at the end, they talked to a couple of the employees, and the employees just said, "Hey, look, we just do our job. We're just really happy that somebody's finally decided to pay attention to us. We feel special." So we're looking at all this technocracy and time and motion and efficiency, but we forget the power of the human spirit. So that was the point I wanted to mention about the last chapter that really, really struck out at me. And then, all this focus on technology, and everybody seems to forget the downsides of the technology, and Quigley was quite adamant about this. It was like, take this or leave this. This is happening, but If I were a student of his, I would have challenged him. And, the thought I have in my head often is if I would have been quiet, would I have been an A student? And if I would have challenged him, would he have failed me? So, anyways, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Well, thank you, Dan, and thanks everyone for being here and again for this long discussion. And we will be posting in the group when the next chapter 18, chapter 18 is covered. We'll probably decide in a couple of weeks, maybe around Christmas time, when we're going to be ready for that discussion. And I wish everyone a Merry Christmas or a Happy Christmas. If you don't celebrate it, just enjoy the day like any other day. And thank you again for being here and committing to this big, long book.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Thank you to everyone. And
thank you.
This person, but have a great Christmas, everyone.
Hey, Merry Christmas. It's John. I
Yep,
enjoyed the discussion today.
Great, John.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everyone. And thank you, Melissa, Darren, Andrew, everybody. Dan, I mean, every time I tune in, I learn so much. This is real history, truly. We may be reading a book, but like you said, we're living it. Every day we're seeing it. And, for each generation, some of us don't have our grandparents. This is, or like older folk who are wise enough to tell us anything, experiences. So this is just absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Melissa, for giving this to all of us. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Thanks, Faye.